here in person and online. I am delighted to be here celebrating the life, although very sad also that he's not here, of our friend and dear colleague Yves Cabannes. I'm Julio Dávila. I'm a professor here at UCL, and I was also director of the DPU for 8 years, including the period when, most of the period when Yves was there. I hope that everybody can hear us well. If people are not hearing us, please let us know. So I'm going to share in a minute the program. We have a very packed afternoon, so we're going to have to run a bit or keep to time. So this is an overdue, in a way, memory for Yves, or memorial for Yves. He was very, very close to us. I would say a few words about his biography in a minute. So the program, Alex, if you can see it on your screens, I would start with a few words about Yves, and then I will give the floor to Cecília Delgado, Yves's widow. It pains me to say that. So that should finish at around 1:55 or thereabouts. I'm not giving you the exact time. Well, the exact times are there, but we're trying to stick to those. Then that would be followed by another block, which is on Yves's work and legacy on forced evictions. And that will be chaired by my colleague Cassidy Johnson, who's here in the room, with a pre-recorded talk, and Alex Frediani will speak as well, who is also in the room. That will then followed by the other big block of Yves's intellectual legacy, which is participatory budgeting, probably one of the issues that he worked most throughout his professional life. Barbara Lipietz, who's here, Professor Barbara Lipietz, will be chairing that event. We have most people, if not all, everybody else is online, other than Barbara for that block. We will then have a tea break. Those of you in the room are invited to have tea and coffee here. Those of you online will have your own tea or whatever it is, depending on the time of the day that you're attending from. Then we will go on to the next block, which is, again, Yves's work and legacy on urban agriculture, which is, again, quite considerable. And for that, we have Alba Hassan, who's chairing it, who worked very, very closely with Yves for his PhD, and he's now working with us in DPU, Dr. Alban Hassan. We have in the room Zene-Mariam Frey, who's here. We're hoping to be joined by Philip Ross. I don't think he's arrived yet. Robert Beale is here. Francisco will be joining us online from Chile, and so will Cecilia Marocchino, who Yves worked a lot on the FAO work on urban agriculture. We'll then have another break, and we will end the day with the launch of a book that Farnaz will be doing, Farnaz Arefian, who's here, Recognizing Intangible Heritage in Urban Transformation, edited by Springer. It's now out. So this is the formal launch. We're hoping that Judith Ryser, who was the co-editor with Yves and Farnaz, will join us online from France, where she is now. And then Cecilia and I will say a few closing words. We'll invite you to have a few drinks and stay for those of you who are in the room. We can't ship those through the internet, so hope you'll be joining us from a distance. So that's about it. Am I missing anything, my colleagues, about this? Okay, brilliant. So I'm just going to say a few words about Yves, and this is based on an obituary that Cassie, Barbara, and I wrote and published in a couple of places. One was DPU News. So for those of you who don't get DPU News, this is the issue that you want. There are plenty of copies at the back, and there's other copies. I'm glad to see Karen here, because it also has a big celebration of Karen's work in life at DPU. Unfortunately, it's two obituaries. One is Yves's, and the other one is Michael Safley. So it's charged with sort of DPU's very prominent and much loved colleagues. So help yourselves to that. There's also a copy of a short history of the DPU, which was put together partly by Karen, 70 years, to celebrate our 70 years. There's copies there. There's plenty of other copies elsewhere. So Yves, I first met Yves, I didn't say that in the obituary, first met Yves in the mid-1980s when I was working at the International Institute for Environmental Development with Jorge Ardoy, who was my boss, and David Satterthwaite, who I hope is joining online to us in this event. And this was in the context of a fascinating project on housing policies, land and housing policies in socialist countries and in the global south. We didn't call it the global south, we called it the third world at the time. And I was given charge, to my amazement, of a country that I've never heard of, which was Guinea-Bissau. It was amazing because, I had to read and prepare myself on African history and West African history and colonialism and imperialism. And then I was hosted by Yves in Paris to discuss these issues because he had worked there, but also he had colleagues who had worked. And he was based at Crete at the time. And it was wonderful. It was a really it was a delightful experience being in that environment and working with people like him. And that's when I met him and realized, much of his qualities that we came to appreciate, his warmth, his generosity, his knowledge, his extensive networks, it came through. I'm not sure whether he had been to Guinea-Bissau, but eventually he traveled for work to 60 countries, although eventually he traveled even for holiday to about 100 countries. So, he was more traveled on the Pope than any Pope that he could care. I think he joined the DPU in 2000, I can't remember the date exactly, but he was in DPU for about 10 years. And it was interesting because he hadn't actually been a lecturer or a professor up to that point, as Cecilia was reminding me yesterday. He had his first job in academia in Harvard for about 3 years. Then he came to us as professor of urban development planning and stayed with us for about 10 years. Then he retired partly on health reasons. But much of what he had been doing had been being a practitioner, being a thinker, full of ideas, very innovative, bringing people together, very committed to social justice cases. And that for him was the center of his professional life. And it was that passion that actually impelled him to work in academia. And it was sometimes difficult to rein him in and say, Yves, you're now an academic. You're not an activist anymore. But he kept being an activist until the end of his life. He was very much somebody who believed in the power of knowledge and ideas, but didn't want them to stay there. He wanted them to be put into practice, seeing the results through things like participatory budgeting, through sort of being there in front of the bulldozers when there were evictions, like Cassidy will tell us later, being there in front of the media and talking to and denouncing abuses of power and so on. It was very difficult to work with him in that sense because he was not your traditional academic. He was much more than that, but he was wonderful. After Gret, the other incarnation where I met him before he came here was doing fabulous work as regional coordinator of the UN Habitat UNDP Urban Management Program, and he was based in Quito for a number of years. And they produced the most amazing work with local governments, particularly medium-sized cities, which were largely forgotten and abandoned by governments. I think, as I said here, I'm just going to read out from this. Yves was a supportive mentor, teacher, coordinator, and friend. And he came back after his retirement every year to UCL to teach. He was a systematic thinker with unbounded levels of energy, traveling frequently to meetings, conferences, training events, and street demonstrations in distant cities at a pace that was only slightly reduced by illness in recent years. He was also a polyglot, and that helped a lot. He probably spoke about 7 or 8 languages or something extraordinary. Anyway, he's left a deep legacy, a deep impression. Proof of this is a number of people that are here in the room. I think Philip has joined us now, and people who are joining us online. So this is a timely celebration for his life. So thank you, Cecilia.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to warmly welcome you all and thank you, the organizers of the event, for inviting me to be here. And thank you to each of the speakers, both in the room and online. We'll talk about Yves and his contributions to their field of work. Some of you may know that my own field of research and practice includes participation and urban agriculture. So, for many years, Yves and I had a simple arrangement. We divide the world into like a kind of treat of Tordesillas. Europe for me and the rest of the world for Yves. Fair enough. But this private joke reflects something important. Yves seems to be everywhere, and in many ways is still his. Speaking about Yves is not easy. He had so many different dimensions: the scholar, the coach, the research, the practitioner, the travel, the friend, the partner. So I realized I should probably follow one of his own recommendations. One idea, one example. This also reflects rather well what we will hear through this event, the theoretical approach to practical examples. So today, I would like to share 3 ideas that for me capture something essential about Yves. His overwhelming curiosity, his ability to build connection, his extraordinary ability to communicate it. So let's begin with curiosity. Not only academic curiosity, not only professional curiosity, but the kind of curiosity that children have, a sense of wonder. The curiosity that makes you ask question after question in order to gain a deeper understanding of things. Yves wants to understand places, people, cultures, institutions, language, ideas, music, cinema, art, politics, history, to name just a few of the subjects he's studying. Recently, I discovered that many years ago, he spent years studying Arabic. I have the notebooks. This did not surprise me, because for Yves, learning a language was never simply about learning words. It was a way of engaging in meaningful dialogues with local people and feeding his infinite curiosity about the world. His doctoral fieldwork was in Iran during the 70s, already reflect this openness and willingness to immerse himself in unfamiliar realities. And that curiosity didn't diminish over time. If anything happens, it's stronger over time. I will always remember his eyes whenever he encountered a new idea, a new project, a new place, or a new questions. Many of you probably know exactly what I mean. No matter how many places he had visited, how many books he had read, or how much experience he had accumulated, he never lost his sense of wonder. And I think that it is a rare gift. The second idea is connection. Part of Yves' life was devoted to building connections between people, places, events, and subjects. For example, he connected participatory budgeting with climate change in Lisbon and Molina de Segura, that is in Spain. Looking around this room today, I suspect many of us are here because at some point, Yves connected us to an idea, a project, a place, or another person. Over the years, those connections became a truly global community. This is why we are here today. Yves connected us, a community of friends from all over the world. I cannot remember traveling anywhere with him without meeting someone he has connected to, a former student, a colleague, a community leader, a mayor, a researcher, a friend. Wherever we went, Yves seems to have an extraordinary network of friends and contacts. The third idea is communication. Everyone here knows that Yves was intellectual, brilliant, but what always impressed me most was his ability to communicate any subject. He was a storyteller, something he inherited from his father. When he spoke, any interesting subject became fascinating. Part of that came from his extraordinary command of language. French, his native language, Portuguese, Spanish, and English, among others. I remember one occasion when we flew from Canada to England in 2011. We landed, got into a taxi in the airport, and while chatting with the drivers, Yves quietly shifted from a Canadian accent to an English one. Yeah, it simply seems to happen naturally. Many times I watch him seated through a conference conducted entirely in English while relying to emails in another language and exchanging comments with me in Portuguese, and still following every detail of the discussion. Then, at the precisely right moment, he would intervene with an insightful and highly relevant contribution. Until today, I have no idea how he managed to do it. There was clearly something exceptional going on inside that remarkable mind. His ability to manage projects, commitments, travels, collaborations, and deadlines across multiple countries and continents remain one of the great mysteries of our time. But as we do with the scientific papers, I should also speak about limitations. Saying no to an interesting project, including traveling to new places, and was not really his strongest skill. That is why one of his latest projects was in Uzbekistan and another in Angola, countries he wanted to understand better in order to feed his enormous intellectual curiosity. As we begin this afternoon, we will hear about some of the themes that shaped Yves' intellectual journey: evictions, participatory budgeting, urban agriculture, heritage, and so on. But before handing over the speakers, I would like to return at Yves what he would certainly have expected me to do. So let's resume. Curiosity, the curiosity that never stopped asking questions and never stopped learning. Connection, the intellectual generosity to connect people across countries, disciplines, institutions, and cultures. Communication, the gift of communicating, inspiring, and bridging ideas to life. For me, these three qualities capture not only what Yves did, but who he was. And that's why we are here today, to celebrate and connect the many contributions he made across different fields and to better understand the bridge he was building between people, ideas, and places around the world. Thank you all for being here.
I hand over now to Cassidy, who will lead the discussion on forced evictions.
Thank you, Julio. And thank you both for your, I just really enjoyed hearing all of the things you had to say about Yves, and I resonate with many of them. I first met Yves when he joined the DPU, which was also the same time that I joined the DPU, which was in 2006. I guess, September of 2006. And we became friends very quickly, both being new to the environment here. And in 2007, which was my first year, I was the course leader for the Building and Urban Design and Development program. And I was charged with taking the students on a field trip. And I had been working in Turkey in the past. And there was a eviction that was happening in the central part of Istanbul, in Seleucule. And I was talking to Yves about this, and we thought this would be an excellent place to come together and to take the students there to work on that. And from there, we started working together on evictions, which was something that he was already very involved in, having been on the UN advisory group for forced evictions for the last few years, and having been involved with Jorge, etc., which Alex will talk about. And I worked with him quite a bit in Istanbul on a number of things to do with evictions. And eventually we worked together on this book on how people face evictions, which is both in English and Spanish, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I just wanted to say sort of a few things about Yves in the work that I did with him on forced evictions. I think the first quality of him is from him is that he brought this incredibly strong energy and presence on the ground. From the moment we started working in Seleucule to all of the different things we ended up doing together on the ground, is that people listened to him. He came to a place. He was informed. He was deeply interested. He had an authoritative presence about him when he came into a place, and people would listen to him. And this is I've sat with him talking to mayors, to all kinds of local government officials, where he would, immediately start talking about, okay, how many people have been evicted? What are the numbers? Which are the dates? How many things have happened exactly? He wanted to know always the information, the data. And he would talk to government officials, to also activists, housing activists, housing rights activists, and also community leaders. So he had this incredible sort of energy to bring out people. He always spoke very clearly when he was talking with people. He used always numbers, dates, and saying things very directly and matter-of-factly. And I think this really brought about in all of the work on evictions something that was missing, which is connecting to the facts on the ground. So the other thing he was really good at was putting things in perspective. So because he had all of this international experience, for example, when we were working in Istanbul, he could connect, saying, well, actually, what's happening to you on the ground here is happening, across different areas of Istanbul, across different countries, and connecting those things. And this was really important for people because it made them feel recognized. And he was also extremely well connected to organizations that were supporting groups on housing rights and on evictions, such as the International Alliance of Inhabitants, Habitat International Coalition, the Center for Housing Rights and Evictions, as well as the UN AGFI. And so these are some qualities about Yves. I'd say I worked with him for a number of years on different things. He was a very demanding person to work with. He was exacting, right? He wanted everything in a particular way. And I think that was part of his, part of why his work is so brilliant, because, he had very definite ideas about how he wanted things to be. So he was always demanding to work with, but I really did appreciate that. And I think because of it, his work is really outstanding. I just wanted to raise, I think he wanted to do this book. This was a work that was funded by the Building and Social Housing Foundation. I think we had two very small amounts of money of 10,000 pounds each. One to do the documentation and another to bring together people for a meeting. And what he felt was missing at the time was something that really documented people's experiences of resisting evictions, because that kind of thing didn't exist from people's perspective. He said, we have like NGOs that will write about it or activists that will write about it, but we don't have the actual people on the ground. And so the purpose of this piece of work was to actually have the stories from the people on the ground. And of course, as Yves always does, in a very methodical way. So, what exactly happened to you? What was the story of what happened to you? What were the dates of it? How many people were evicted? How many houses were destroyed? Where did you have to move to? How long were you there? Exact dates, maps, photographs, documents of different pressures that the police, that the military, different things that have happened. He wanted to document those things. And this is what this publication does. And in an international way. So for example, we have Buenos Aires, Porto Alegre, Durban, Hangzhou, Istanbul, Karachi, Santo Domingo. These are stories of people who were facing evictions in that. And I think just one last thing to say about Yves in his work, and I think this is probably about evictions, but everything is, he is so good at putting things into a plain perspective in a way of categorizing things. So for example, in this book, he talks about the different strategies that were used for resistance and that are deployed simultaneously by groups and change over time. So he talks about, for example, negotiation with public authorities, about occupation, resisting and living, about using legal channels in court cases, about open struggles, resistance, and political, on the front lines of resistance, and then building rights and policies and campaigning. So that way he can kind of categorize things in a very simple way, and this became something that is, I think extremely useful about his work going forward. So we have two speakers now that are going to talk about two different things. One is a recorded talk from Cihan Uzun who's a housing rights activist in Istanbul. She's pre-recorded her talk, and she has a short video at the end which shows it's actually from a film that was made in Istanbul called Ecumenopolis in 2011 and features Yves in part of the film. So we've just taken a clip from the filmmaker. So that will be the first one. And then second, we'll have Alex Frigiani, who's sitting next to me, who is principal researcher in human settlements at the International Institute for Environment and Development. And he's also the co-convener of the Housing Justice Hub. So he's going to talk a little bit about Yves' work and also about how that is connecting to work they're doing on housing justice today. So, yeah.
Hi, everybody. I'm Cihan Uzunçarşılı Baysal from Istanbul, Turkey. First, I would like to thank the organizers of the event for making this possible. We owe Yves a lot. He was a great comrade, a friend, a great teacher, a human rights activist and defender, but above all, he was an intellectual who illuminated our work in our way, and we will never forget him. I will start the talk with his first visit to Istanbul. That was in 2008, when Istanbul was chosen as the cultural capital of European cultural capital of 2010. And as you know, as in all beautification projects, demolitions and forced evictions of the poor started. Yves came in 2007 for a fieldwork-based project carried out by a group, and in which Cassidy, who is the organizers of this event, was also one of the team members. And the context of the work is the neighborhood of Sulukule, which was at the time under threat of demolitions due to the urgent transformation project in the pipeline. So that is how Sulukule was at the time then, a lively neighborhood, as you can see, with people using the streets as the rooms of their houses. That was actually the sense of Sulukule, Romani neighborhood in green, and very modest housing. And that is the European culture European Capital of Culture 2010 vision. It's not a Nazi city, that's Istanbul, unfortunately. And placing Sulukule was the alternative proposal to conserve the living heritage of Romani culture. That is the name of the project Yves proposed. And it wanted to put forward a more socially inclusive approach and allowing people to stay put and being part of the city's urban transformation with new prospects. And the importance of the work beyond is that it's not just, it is the showed how the international academic community and the neighborhood movements can collaborate. Sulukule thus became not merely an urban renewal site, but also a laboratory for participatory planning, advocacy-based planning, preservation of cultural heritage, struggle for the right to housing. These were all discussed on an international scale. And this experience also later served as a reference point for rights-based urban renewal debates conducted in various parts of the region in subsequent years. Then Yves came back in 2008 to Istanbul to again see what was going on in the project. And he was then chosen as the ACFE mission, ACFE chairperson, that is UN Habitat Advisory Group on Forced Evictions. He was the chairperson then. At the time, I was writing my thesis on forced evictions, focusing on the Ayazma, a Kurdish migration region in Küçükçekmece municipality. They were also waiting for forced evictions and demolitions. I missed them in Istanbul. Then I contacted them through email, wrote about the Ayazma people. And the wonder about him is that he immediately returned. I mean, he did not know me at all, but he immediately got concerned and returned. And he said that he was going to get Sulukule to the UN Habitats meeting, and he will also talk about Ayazma. Then later, our connections later went on, and I informed them about the other neighborhoods under forced eviction in Istanbul, because there was a mass forced eviction process going on at the time. That was in 2008, and the new legal laws were accepted, and the people were just thrown to the streets. And that was, I guess, the beginning when he realized that the only thing he could do much more effectively was to have the ACFE mission come to Istanbul. And I know that he fought very, very hard with Habitat to have the mission to Istanbul. I mean, he discussed the case and he convinced them that Istanbul needed the ACFE mission, and ACFE came to Istanbul in 2009. And we had this, there was on the mission team, Yves, and also I was the local expert, and also Arif Hassan, Professor Arif Hassan was also on the team. And we wrote this comprehensive report on the forced evictions of Istanbul then. It made a great impact, actually. And that is Yves as the ACFE chief. Again, coming to Sulukule with Sulukule platform. And this is the chairperson of the Romani Neighborhood Association, and also the team members of Sulukule platform. Cassidy is here. And he visited the people there and told them their rights again. And this is the forced eviction panel and forum at Istanbul Bilgi University Human Rights Law Center. The press was very much involved. It made a great impact, actually, on the press and social media. That was very important for us, and also for the neighborhoods as well, struggling for their rights. And unfortunately, in 2013, Sulukule was wholly demolished and turned into these Ottoman-style villas, whatever. Lost its green, lost its population, lost its soul. This is Ayazma, the Kurdish neighborhood I talked about in 2005. There behind is the Olympic Stadium. You can see the Olympic effect, why the demolitions would start and forced evictions would start. And demolitions went on. And the tenant population were given no rights, so they just built these makeshift barracks and stayed there. And when Akfe mission team came to Istanbul, Yves also came together with these people. You see, the children and women were in very harsh conditions. I mean, about 2 years they stayed there struggling. And what Akfe mission has accomplished, where has the mission been successful? We can say that. Firstly, the Ayazma, this tenant population, became beneficiaries from the housing, from the social housing, from mass housing administration site at Kayapaşa. They all, of course, had to pay their installments, but still, I mean, it was better for them to live in under a roof rather than in tents. And actually, another success was that UN Habitat took TOKİ, that is the mass housing administration, who was the force behind forced evictions and the dispersion of the communities, who was the great force, TOKİ. UN Habitat took it out of the list of Habitat Awards. And forced eviction is an internationally recognized legal concept as a human rights violation, got into the vocabulary and the agenda of the local communities. Up to that time, it was on the agenda of the academia and the activists and circles working for human rights, but not on the grassroots. It came into the vocabulary of the grassroots. Now they could pronounce its forced eviction, what was coming to them, and it's an internationally human rights violation. And what is more, Akfe's support, and especially Yves' support, as you would see in the video in the last part of this talk, encouraged and empowered the struggles. Then in 2012, we as Urban Moments Istanbul organized a Right to the City event, because now demolitions had really reached the peak. It was unbearable. So I called Cesare from International Alliance of Inhabitants, and also, of course, Yves, to come and support our organization. They came. So this was a zero eviction campaign, and the date is very important. As you can see, it's 2012, January. So just about 1.5 years before the Gezi uprisings. It was the first time that Gezi Park was used as an urban rights struggle, as a venue for urban rights struggle. So that was important. And here Cesare is talking with the neighborhoods, taking the stage, and of course, Yves. And also Yves conducted a workshop here with the neighborhoods on forced evictions. Then Yves never stopped his connections with Istanbul. This is an important email, actually. For example, the Bona Pastor from Barcelona was also a Romani neighborhood, had the same fate as Sulukule. He wrote to us that maybe he suggested that we directly get in touch with this community and support one another and do a solidarity organization. I mean, his interest, his connection with Istanbul always continued. And he gave his participatory budgeting work to be translated to Turkish. And it was translated and used by Istanbul's opposition municipalities of Istanbul. And last January, I visited the northern part of Turkey, to Ryser, Fındıklı municipality. And to my surprise, I found out that the book was there. So I believe we owe Yves a lot. He still illuminates our way. He's still our guide, even though he's not with us. I would like to finish my talk here and leave it to the ground to Yves, talking to the Ayazma population for their struggle. Thank you.
Okay, so the negotiation which have been done so far to to be within the system are perfectly leading the people out of the site. So this, in terms of forced evictions, is not necessarily the best approach, because what is obtained is facilitating the removal of people from where the government do not want them anymore. This is Sulukule, this is Ayasma. Ayasma is a free land for talking. Negotiating relocation is another thing. But as a right, there were people on the site, and today there is nobody. This is the crude reality. I'm very pleased to meet him because I remember how he was living. I remember that we met there. By yourself, you are not going to solve many problems.
Tek başınıza hiçbir probleminizi çözemezsiniz.
But if you get organized,
Ama örgütlenirseniz
you will resolve this problem, your kids, and many problems.
bu sorunu da çözersiniz. Çocuklarınızın sorununu ve bir sürü çok sorunu da çözümlersiniz.
I'm sorry, the sound quality was not always good there, but if anyone wants to see, they can. I can share with them the original video from Cihan. But I think you get a flavor there of the kind of impression that he made on people in Istanbul, and of course, the same in many countries around the world that he worked in. So I'm going to give the floor now to Alex. Thank you very much. So,
Great. Thanks, Cassidy. Thanks for the invite to be here with you. Yeah, I joined DPU at 2007 when I joined, and I quickly got to know Yves from very early stage, hanging out in his wonderful office in Dávila Square for those who know, with a lot of wonderful books over there, and trying to grab a book. Of course, I couldn't leave the room without writing down which book I'm taking off and to give it back. Yeah, it's been always a relationship of inspiration, of discussing politics, ways of engaging with the world. And it's great to be talking about his life here. I wanted to focus a little bit more on his understanding of international solidarity and trying to interpret it in terms of the struggles against forced evictions, and particularly going a little bit more in depth into the work that happened on the advisory group against forced evictions that was set up to advise. We're going to come to advise who. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But to advise, in theory, the executive director of UN Habitat of the time. Sharing here with you, a bit confused, but come through conversation with my colleague Camila Cossinha, that has been also doing a lot of work on evictions from IID in collaborations with other groups internationally, actually documenting the Zero Evictions campaign in Brazil, a lot of and also conversations that we had with Scott Leckie, who set up the Center for Housing Rights and Evictions. It's called CORE, that was mentioned already, and I had a conversation with Scott, yes, Camila and I on Monday, and also with Cesare Antolini, who is from the International Alliance of Inhabitants, another conspire, comrade of Yves in many of these journeys. And so I was talking to them, asking them questions about Yves' engagement on forced evictions, about the advisory group, how it came about. And I wanted to tell you a little bit what came out from those exchanges as a way of reflecting about his work. So important, and I want to do it because I also think currently we are in need of reflecting about that. No, I think there are particular situations that we're experiencing today that we're in need of inspiration, and I think it's time to think about international solidarity and what lessons can be learned from those efforts for today's engagement around gross violations of human rights, such as forced evictions. So a story starts, at least from Cesare's perspective, with the World Assembly of Urban Inhabitants in 2000 in Mexico. a massive convening of grassroots housing social movements in Mexico, and where they started discussing in that context, how can we raise the agenda of forced evictions, talked a lot about right to the city in that particular moment. And in that, they started thinking that we need to document popular. I think very interesting that the beginning of the conceptualization of what became AGFE was about, at least from Cesar's perspective, was about those popular struggles. How do we document, how do we strengthen those popular struggles against forced evictions, and how do we give them more visibility? Then in 2002, it was the first World Urban Forum, or some people contest if that was the first World Urban Forum or not, but officially that was, according to the records. In 2002, in Nairobi, UN Habitat had internally a global campaign on security of tenure, and they ran a series of meetings inside that World Urban Forum in Nairobi around forced evictions. And one of the recommendations, I know today we don't even read what's the call for action in the end of the World Urban Forum, but one of the recommendations from that World Urban Forum was to set up an advisory group on forced evictions, advisory to the executive director of UN Habitat. So it came from that. Again, there was a connection between the articulation happened in 2000, then how that then travels to the World Urban Forum. Then 2003, there was the UN Habitat Governing Council resolution. So there was a resolution, member states agreed to set up this advice. So it was officially recognized, okay, we're gonna set up this advisory group directly to executive director. In a moment that also we need, as Cesar was explaining, a moment that UN Habitat was not a human rights organization, okay? I think from the perspective of many of those grassroots organizations, they were pushing UN Habitat to become more of a human rights, and talking about forced eviction was about pushing a human rights agenda within UN Habitat, which was very strategic for many aspects of many conversations. In 2004, inaugural meeting of the advisory group, and wow, list of people in that team is like the global totals, like the super top. Joking, Joel Bonek, Sun Suk, Olívio Dutra, Maligaye, Scott Leckie, Letícia. I mean, people who want to be in your side in any struggle, I think they were there. David Satterwhite was one of them. Jane Weru was in that team. So a fantastic collective of people that were invited to be part of this advisory group, which then soon afterwards had to select a convener, which then was Yves Cabannes, no? So which I think he was still in Harvard, and then he was moving to DPU. There are 3 reports of AGFE. AGFE then, I think from the records, started in 2004, and in 2011, it has a final report who says it's not really active anymore. So I imagine that AGFE kind of died out by 2010 and 2011. I think the last report kind of marks its conclusion of what the advisory group was. And there are these 3 great reports, extremely detailed, very methodical. I wonder who was behind the writing of many of those reports. With all the facts accurate, each story from each place, during the period of AGFE, there was several visits. There were research that was documented on the ground. They were encouraging people to submit documentation. They developed toolkits for documenting forced evictions. They proposed a global eviction database to UN Habitat, which nobody knows what happens to that. They was facilitating learning across different groups, resisting evictions. They shared many lessons in the World Urban Forums in 2004, 2006. So there was this kind of key milestone. I think when we were in Rio in the World Urban Forum, there was something still going on, but it was not anymore. They were not allowed anymore to use the AGFE as a terminology. But a lot of the discussion of that came, when we were there, and they met twice with the executive director. So actually, the point was to meet, to advise the executive director, but actually they only met twice during this whole 6-year period, which shows that maybe that focus was not necessary to advise the executive director after all, like maybe there was something else here at stake. And so what was at stake? Yeah? What was if I could then think about what was the theory of change behind this operation, and how Yves, the concerted effort that Yves was doing with many of those other groups, civil society networks at that time, what do they see the potential of this advisory group? And clearly it is the leverage on the UN system, on the international human rights framework to advance local struggles. Clearly that was the underpinning belief that we can draw on those levers. We can draw on the UN multilateral system. We can draw on the international human rights framework. And again, a comment from Scott Lackey saying that, well, Yves was not a human rights trained lawyer, right? And Camila was reflecting after the meeting we had. It's quite interesting how a person that was not a lawyer by background, by formation, also became part of the process of building the international architecture of housing human rights approaches and framework. And he had that ability to navigate that kind of really complex human rights framework at the same time having this strategic kind of mindset. So yeah, he embraced the human rights. Scott mentions how he first talked about human rights. Yves jumped into it and saw the possibility, understood the possibility that it could bring to local struggles. And the documentation of how the visits, specifically the visits, were thought so strategically to strengthen local action, as we were just hearing from Turkey. And all of the documented stories from the visits had something that they left behind. Was a multi-stakeholder parliamentary commission in Dominican Republic. It was a working group that facilitated conflict resolution in Curitiba. It was the unofficial but a commitment to a moratorium on evictions and evacuations in Rome for 12 months, which led to the declaration of an eviction-free territory. Each visit left a concrete institutional legacy through which the struggles for evictions was strengthened. And when you see the participants of each of those visits in the documents, it's kind of incredible the penetration of each visit in the strategic thinking, and using that power of being an advisory group to a UN body could be used to then leverage change on the ground. He also unlocked coordination. There is a couple of examples that are very interesting that were mentioned. One in New Orleans on how AGFE, together with the Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing, led to a series of documentation of the New Orleans disaster and a post-Katrina housing conditions. And in Zimbabwe, also, there was a kind of event described by Cesare, how they managed to get the executive director down to Zimbabwe and to actually talk about evictions in Zimbabwe, which was very difficult. And it was a really, it showed the possibilities of if that type of advisory group was to mobilize political buy-in by a UN body like UN Habitat, the type of impact it could generate in localities was a really was there to take. So the second point, I think you pointed out that very clear. It's not only on evidence and documentation; is also in strategies and responses. I think the whole framing from the beginning onwards was about those popular strategies of resistance. How do we document them? How can we share them? And the book on how people face evictions that you were writing with him is really emblematic of that type of commitment. But I want to say that none of this was done in swiftly. It was full of battles, full of lost sleeps. Cesare was describing to me long nights of discussing how they're going to avoid legal battles because of the type of visits that we're having and how they will be facing different type of legal challenges for their own presence. The UN Habitat was furious with what they were doing. They didn't like the articulation that they were making on the ground. They say that they be representing UN Habitat, that their official visits was not a UN visit, but they were giving the impression that it was a UN visit when in reality it was not. We saw the Daily Mail a bit later on here in the UK on what that type of operation, but they never said that they were a UN visit. At least from Cesare's account, it was very clear of the role that they were playing. And in the bottom of it, Cesar explains that for them, they had this different understanding of who they were supposed to be advising. They were advising the collective struggles against forced evictions. And from UN Habitat, they were supposed to be advising the executive director of UN Habitat in those 2 meetings that they were scheduled over the period of 6 years. So this vision of international solidarity, of this example of Scott explained to us that in Zambia there was this activist called Grace that she stood in front of a house that was about to be bulldozed, and she started waving the International Human Rights Code on human rights, and she convinced the bulldozer that if that bulldozer put down her house, he would be going to prison, and the guy actually didn't bulldoze her house. So I mean, this was a kind of representation of it is a bit, it is a small story, but the use of the international framework at that time had a meaning and had a value, had a power. It was not necessarily legal, but it had a political. And the question for us today is, does it still have a value? No, I mean, can we still use of those frameworks, these articulations, this type of political mobilization that Yves was doing together with many others in that time? Is that still relevant to today's world? It's something that we ask ourselves constantly. How do we operate? And then we put this question to Scott, like from Core, and he said, "Look, depends on which context we're talking about. If you go to Argentina, maybe it doesn't really work, but maybe in other areas where there's more openings, it might have more substantial." And he said, "What if he was reflecting? If this was a question to Yves, how would he answer that question?" And I typed down his answer, and I'm going to try to read it to you as I typed it. He said, "You need to use the bad period." Yves would say that you need to use the bad period to plan for the next good period. This current emergency, this emergency of this right wing, is showing how bad this vision is, and it will be replaced by something far better, fairer, and equalitarian. These dynamics work as a pendulum. And if you look around, the toxic period is coming to an end, and it has passed its high point. Let's hope what comes out is a way stronger international system, so something even better, a renaissance of international affair and law, where we can recognize the common inherent nature of humans. So I think this is a bit of our job now to imagine what is this renaissance, but maybe also thinking that we want this internationalist approach to be maybe not a replication of what it was at the time, maybe not so personalized as it was, giving so much protagonism to specific individuals, but maybe collective agency to more relationship building. And maybe we need to also think how the lessons from the past can then emerge in today's world, but be in a slightly different arrangement to talk to today's ways of articulating ourselves against human rights violations. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
So thank you very much. We have a bit of time for a sort of open discussion about on Yves' work on evictions, if anyone wants to say. Also, if we have anyone online, we can bring you into the room to make a comment.
There's no comment. So thank you so much for such great inputs from all of you and reminiscent and at the same time really provocative thoughts. What I find interesting indeed, as you point out, Alex, is the permanence of this issue of forced evictions. Right? I mean, as he was doing this work, I don't know, 20 years ago or more, and it's still very, very much acute. And I think I really enjoyed your provocation, Alex, to think about, what were the tools that he used a lot when he was working on this project with you, Cassidy, and But what's interesting is we're just coming back from the World Urban Forum, where, by the way, historically, he was always extremely present. As we know, he was such an actor who wanted to be present in the places where evictions were taking place, but also in these discussions of the multilaterals and institutional power. So he was always in the woods. And we were involved with Camila and Alex and Paula and others in this discussion around, can we revive and recenter this notion, this issue around forced evictions and make it a much more political, central issue? And I each time it reminds me of, what would Yves say in that moment? What would be his recommendations? But I think he would be very happy and excited about this process. And maybe it would be interesting to share a little bit from you, where you think, where is this going? Or too early to say anything about it, but just to sort of at least let people know that one of this really important terrain of activism is very much alive again, and we're really wanting to work with his legacy.
Just if you was so I think the one thing that is important to say that after the end of Pact, I think the International Tribunal on Housing Rights has continued. The International Alliance of Inhabitants continued doing and actually continued supporting that process, no? And it has been a really interesting. But then there's been a vacuum since that of any space within the multilateral system to talk a stop shop, let's call it, on issues of forced evictions. In terms of how do you coordinate action between different agencies? Who do you reach out to create more visibility? And there has been really no openings, I think, to discuss forced eviction within the multilateral system for a long time. And even though there has been mobilization, there's been discussions. So with Habitat International Coalition and the International Alliance on Housing, they've been discussing with this previous special rapporteur around how do you create maybe a space within the multilateral system, something that maybe needs to be outside UN Habitat, maybe thinking of something that's across different UN agencies to be able to have traction and capacity to raise the issues of evictions on different topics. But still, we haven't been able to get that off the ground. So what we decided to do in the build-up of the World Urban Forum was to make, drawing on some provocations from the Brazilian social movements and towards the new executive director, is to say, can you provide some leadership to revigorate this discussion around an international space through which we can raise the forced evictions issue, that we can talk about documenting it, and we can talk about how we can at least coordinate the efforts between the different agencies working on this topic, and how can we use leverage on it to exert pressure on local drivers of violations of the right to adequate housing. And she was open to that, so she encouraged us to submit an invitation, and we decided to target that invitation as something coming from the partners of the Hub for Housing Justice, which the DPU is a partner, Slum Dwellers International, the Asian Coalition for Housing Rights. There's a whole network of organizations that are part of that. So there was that request to set up a meeting between UN Habitat and the newly appointed special rapporteur on the right to adequate housing to discuss about the intent to try to discuss collectively about a potential mechanism to deal with this. And yeah, there was an openness to continue that conversation. We at the moment just coming up, just like writing the notes from that meeting, but at least having a first step towards not joint action but coordination around the different agencies of how they can talk to each other. If there is a mission by the special rapporteur, that might be also how civil society can share information on forced evictions, and how UN Habitat can position itself also in some of those discussions. So at least coordinating different efforts around forced evictions is the starting point. And yeah, I mean, I feel that I think it has a transformative potential there, but I think we're still in a very initial steps, and it's really to some extent sad to see many of the issues that they were facing at the time around the hesitation from UN Habitat to engage more proactively in some of those issues. For example, it's still present in some of the conversations, but I guess it's about trying to find the leverage, the possibilities of reimagining that relationship so that we can try to revigorate some of those efforts.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a very, maybe potentially because what happened, with the UN AGFI and the work on evictions kind of metamorphosized into other things, like, for example, on about displacement, or there's different words that are used, and that notion of like forced eviction kind of left the whole policy debate and kind of global debate in the last year. So it's very interesting and exciting to see it coming back onto the plate. And I think that Yves' work gives a very interesting blueprint of how to do this, and especially of the kind of detail of the understanding exactly how people are resisting evictions, what are the different struggles that are going on, what are the different mechanisms that we can use now to try to address those problems. So I think it's quite a big legacy that Yves has left with this work that hopefully will be taken forward now. So I thank you to all our speakers for this part of the event, and I think we'll move on to
the next layer. So we're going to move now to the participatory budgeting section. So thank you very much to all the speakers so far. You've really covered so much already about Yves' indefatigable and impressive legacy that makes intellectual rigor, exacting precision, scientific exactitude. I thought very much about you when you said all these details. The painstaking amount of detail went on a lot of the evidence. It was the political conviction and the impressive strategic mind. These are all traits that have been very present also in the work around PBs. You want me to do something? Great. So my name is Bartlett. I'm also a colleague of Yves at the GPU, and I'm going to be chairing this next part of the program, where we're going to be talking about participatory budgeting. And I'm afraid all the participants are going to be online, which is very much testimony to the global reach of Yves and his constant attention and interest in seeking new territories, new possibilities in all corners of the world. So maybe I'll say a few words about how I met Yves. I met Yves through a South African colleague, actually. I had finished my PhD in and on South Africa, just 2 young children, and I was looking for a job in London. and luckily at the time, a common friend in South Africa said, "Oh, I think you should speak to Yves. He's French like you. He does really interesting things. He is quite political, and he really loves the good life. And I think you will really enjoy meeting." And so he put me in touch with him. And so basically, yes, it was through Yves that I entered my DPU journey. And yes, I wasn't disappointed. So his optimism in the face of adversity was really contagious. And it was all the more contagious because it was backed by such carefully analyzed evidence of countless progressive processes just about anywhere on the map. His flamboyant sense of style, his sense of fun, his appreciation of good food, music, and life, and also his enduring solidarity were all hallmarks. And for me, really pointed to the joy at the heart of fighting for the right to the city for all. So we sparred a lot and debated and recreated the world. I don't know if it quite works in English, but that's how we say it in French. And we exchanged on a lot of different topics, but the one I think we exchanged most on was on the topic of participatory budgeting. And eventually we co-wrote a working paper and then an article that was a reflective article, sort of a few decades into the arrival of PB onto the map in Brazil and the expansion of PB in more than 40 countries, 3,000 or so cases. These are the numbers that I have from 2017, and I don't know who to turn to now to know about, what is the update of figures, because Yves had these updates. So we wrote a paper together, and I think it's going to be shared in the chat. And that paper was very much, it was very much a co-reflection. It was almost like a dialogue And it was, in a sense, me prodding this encyclopedia of PBE, this historical repository of PBE, and in a way, playing a bit the devil's advocate and sort of doing a bit of a remise en cause, so kind of challenging a bit the best practice approach that PBE had, but at the same time, obviously, very much convinced that it was something to salvage. And ultimately, our paper showed that PBE, like any other instrument of public policy, is what you make of it. It's only as transformative as the political pressures and movement intent behind it. But of course, that PBE does remain an extremely generative potential. He used to very much like this term of inverting priorities through PBEs, but that they require vigilance, mobilization, and of course, a razor-sharp political and strategic mind, which Yves had in spades. So I think also for him, the reason he continued working so much on it was that it was almost a vector through the back door, through which you could try and then facilitate processes in places which, on the face of it, did not necessarily look so promising. And a lot of his later work was in absolutely non-democratic contexts, and he was really seeing that there was a potential there for changing things, which was extremely exciting. So to help us understand a little bit his legacy and contribution, both intellectual but also very much practical contribution on PB, we've got a number of colleagues. We're going to start with Cacilda Pereira Lima, I hope I'm pronouncing it properly, from Brazil. Katia is a good friend of Yves, and she is the General Coordinator at the National Secretariat for Social Participation, General Secretariat of the Presidency of the Republic of, in the Presidency of the Republic of Brazil. She's a specialist in participatory governance, social participation, and participatory budgeting, and member of the Brazilian Participatory Budgeting Network. So it was very important, of course, to start with Brazil, because that's where it all started. And the presentation of Katia will be in Portuguese. She has slides in English, and because we do not have a translator in Portuguese, I think, Julio, you're going to be... Julio's going to jump in.
Heroic attempt at trying to summarize it. No.
Alex, you can do a double act.
You're the Lucifer, I'm not.
So you decide. But anyway, from time to time, actually, you didn't know. It's a bit unfair. Maybe it start, and then we have,
It's just a summary at the end.
And then we have.
You start.
And so from time to time, Katia, if you don't mind, we will interrupt you so that we can have a little bit of translation. Thank you very much. So because what we'll do is apparently Katia is not here just now, so we're going to move to our next speaker. So that's John. So we're moving all the way to Indonesia. Well, actually, you're currently in Washington, I think.
That's right. Yes.
Talk to us about PB largely in Indonesia, which is when you were doing a lot of work at a time when Indonesia was democratizing. So this democratizing tool in a democratizing context. It would be really nice to hear your work with the Kota Kita Foundation. Thank you very much, John.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for having me. So I'm a longtime friend and collaborator with Yves. We first met when I worked as an intern for him in Quito, Ecuador in 2000. Later, I was his student and teaching assistant at Harvard University in 2005. And we went on to collaborate in numerous projects in Bangladesh, Angola, and Indonesia. Yves served on the board of this NGO that you'll hear a little bit about, Kota Kita, from 2018. I'm certainly blessed not only for what I learned from and experienced together with him, but also the many wonderful and inspiring people who I met through him and see joined here today with us. So can you just advance one slide, please? Thank you. Yves will be remembered as an educator, a researcher, and an activist. He was also a devoted friend and perceptive and generous mentor. Perhaps he was also a little bit of a co-conspirator too. He wore all of these hats all of the time. There was not one hat or role that was more important to him than another. With Yves, you would always be getting all of these roles with him at the same time. Next slide. Participatory budgeting was introduced in Indonesia in 2000, starting in a handful of cities and later becoming scaled up as a national urban policy in 2004. Participatory budgeting rode the wave of the democracy movement of the late 90s and early 2000s, referred to as reformasi or reformation, following the stunning overthrow of the authoritarian Suharto regime in 1998. Next slide. You can go through the next 3 slides. But as the years passed, popular enthusiasm for participatory budgeting waned. It became formulaic and a bureaucratic and procedural process. For many, instead of delivering transformative change and righting wrongs, it elicited feelings of apathy and even claims of elite capture. Next slide. The local NGO, Kota Kita, meaning our city, was established in the city of Solo in central Java in 2009. At the time, it was a voluntary initiative of activists and urban planners who sought to reinvigorate and re-energize democracy and public participation. Next slide. With a visionary young mayor leading the city, its first elected mayor ever, a handful of passionate activists and I set about undertaking community mapping and data collection. We designed participatory tools, we engaged local leaders and residents, and neighborhood by neighborhood tried to reactivate the excitement for deliberative democracy. Next slide. We saw participatory budgeting as a powerful tool that could deliver spatial justice and social inclusion. We were no doubt naive and unsophisticated. Kota Kita was really nothing back then, a nascent initiative full of good intentions and motivated by idealism, with a spirit that was not really matched by tested tools or knowledge. Next slide. Next slide. And that's when Yves came to visit in 2011. Next. Of course, he loved Indonesia. It's a country where flamboyant and colorful shirts are widely worn and where smiles come easily and the people are open and friendly. At once, he saw the potential of the mini atlas, and he was struck by its simplicity, how it democratized and made available information and offered a compelling invitation to lay people to learn about their cities and urge them to action. Perhaps he was being over-generous, but he immediately shared word about our work with his network. He had seen something in our work and in us that we ourselves had maybe not seen. Next slide. It was easy to be swept up in his enthusiasm. Participatory budgeting, after all, was a big part of his life's work, and he exuded energy and vision. He was so good at stoking zeal and rousing spirits. He encouraged and supported this small group. He insisted we strengthen the organization and pushed us to write and document our experiences with rigor. He was also unyielding in his insistence that participatory budgeting could never be realized unless the budget was truly in the hands of the people. Consultation and rhetoric alone was simply not enough. Real change was only possible when the people really were in control of the process, when budgets were not just symbolic, but truly meaningful and capable of transforming local realities. Next slide. Over the next years, Yves teamed up with Kota Kita and other NGOs, Fitra and Prakarsa. He meticulously collected and analyzed data, documented practices, and contextualized this within a bigger global picture. He hauled this sporadic and dispersed activism out from the shadows and pulled it into the center stage of his and a whole field of practitioners' attention. He connected us with scholars and practitioners from China, Russia, Brazil, West Africa, and Europe. Together, we shared stories, championed each other's successes, and pinpointed promise. No case was too small, nor lesson too insignificant. We were all part of a brave and expansive campaign, and most of us had never even imagined was even out there. Together, we made a statement about the work of global scale and consequence. Next slide. In 2014, when Indonesia passed a village law, which gave residents of 75,000 villages the autonomy to deliberate and decide upon how to manage their own governance, community development, and resources, with over $100,000 per village, per year. Yves was the first to spot and declare this the largest and most extensive participatory budgeting of its kind in the world. Yves, the researcher, had documented, the educator had built capacity and confidence, the activist pushed the envelope, and the friend and mentor pushed these spirited activists to share their experiences, and he gave them the spotlight to go out and share and inspire others. Next slide. But Yves was never finished and never completely satisfied. His quest to promote participatory budgeting was seemingly insatiable. In 2020, together with Kotikita, he helped conduct further research leading to piloting Green PB in Semarang, a city of nearly 2 million. In it, resources were allocated to residents to be able to respond to flooding and climate impacts with their own community-level resilient solutions. Next. More recently, and you can see some of the tools that were developed and piloted. Next slide. And then the next slide. And more recently, he looked at participatory budgeting and the care sector, the use of local resources to support children, the elderly, and disabled, responding to very localized vulnerabilities and needs. Next slide. You can even take the slides down. Thank you, Barbara. Today, participatory budgeting in Indonesia is in retrenchment, but there is a strong and active community of researchers, and its legacy continues to shape cities and village life. Kota Kita is one of Indonesia's leading urban NGOs. It regularly publishes research and engages at international fora and contributes to global advocacy and practitioner platforms. Yves, no doubt, gave the organization the confidence to develop its own voice and research and pushed it towards the progressive advocacy position it maintains today. Along the way, Yves spurred widespread interest in participatory budgeting in Indonesia. He pushed and also uplifted practitioners and researchers. He strengthened the capacity of local organizations and universities. He plugged these people into knowledge resources and networks that they didn't even know were there. And he was able to frame Indonesia's winding journey in a global context and show it to all the world. If one were to climb atop all of his writings, reports, books, ideas, his legacy will surely be the inspiring view of the possibilities and broadening of the horizons of this work, its reach and its significance, and the significance of its impact. Thank you.
So much, John. And as you were talking, I just received a message from an ex-student who is in Malaysia, and I know that he was also very involved with the experimentation around PDs in Malaysia. So it continues in the region. So we're going to go back now to Brazil. Katia has joined us. Thank you so much, Katia. And so we're going to do this work of Katia presenting her slides, which are in English, and Alex doing a translation. Alex, you're doing a duo.
We will translate the key ideas in the end.
In the end. Okay, in the end. Okay, thank you. Maybe it's good that you let me.
Bom dia. Aqui no Brasil é bom dia. Lamento muito não poder falar em inglês. É muito bom estar com vocês. Eu confesso que estou um pouco emocionada. É muito importante para nós brasileiros fazer parte desse momento de homenagem ao Yves. Eu quero agradecer imensamente a Cecília pelo convite, pela tradução, por traduzir esse momento. É muito chato não poder falar em inglês e poder compreender todos vocês, mas, enfim, de qualquer forma, vou apresentar aqui rapidamente. Peraí.
Katia,
Oi.
desculpa interromper. Você vai estar compartilhando seus slides a partir daí do seu computador? Pode ser?
Sim, estou tentando colocar para compartilhar.
Do you want to translate that first introduction?
Katia, a gente vai estar escutando, tomando notas, aí no final da sua fala a gente vai fazer a tradução, tá bom?
Tá bom.
Ok.
Desafios. Só mais um segundo, por favor. Apresentação. Está compartilhado? Está compartilhado ou não a tela? Alguém pode me confirmar se está compartilhada a tela? Senão eu vou falando, então.
Ainda
Se
não,
tiver.
ainda não.
Não está compartilhado.
Não está?
Não, não.
I will share.
But Barbara,
Bárbara vai
partilhar.
compartilhar. Can she do it?
I'm going to try.
These two services, two resources have good English translation.
Oh.
Eu não sei o que está acontecendo aqui. Não está compartilhando.
Olá!
Pronto. Então vamos lá. Então eu vou falar rapidamente. Oi?
Espera um momento, Kátia. Espera um momento, Kátia. Kátia.
Tudo isso é para aquecer a apresentação brasileira, é isso?
Maybe it's my fault.
Não, estamos
But we don't want to hear the French, do we?
Não, Kátia, nós estamos a tentar fazer tradução em simultâneo, só que, na vez de sair para o inglês, saiu para o francês, e por isso é que estávamos aqui a rir um pouco. Vamos ver se agora a tradução simultânea sai em inglês, está bem? Desculpa. Começa? Pode começar? Kátia, podes começar. Obrigada.
Tá. Eu estou um pouco... Pode passar para mim, então? Primeiro, perdão. Então, acho que o principal questão aqui nesse slide não é mais conceitual, orçamento participativo, mas falar da importância do surgimento do OAP a partir da realidade das cidades periféricas de São Paulo, das regiões metropolitanas do Brasil, onde estavam concentrados as comunidades com mais vulnerabilidade social. Essas comunidades com vulnerabilidade social, elas buscaram se organizar em espaços que pudessem trazer direitos para essas regiões. E, a partir disso, conjunto de movimentos, e aí a gente tinha movimentos contra a carestia e movimentos por direitos, começou a se construir conselhos regionais, e esses conselhos regionais populares começaram a ter... Pode passar para o próximo slide, por favor? Começaram a trabalhar também princípios da democracia participativa, buscando mais investimentos para a superação dos desafios que eram morar nessas regiões. Aí pode passar, por favor. E começam a surgir experiências mais organizadas, né? E aí a primeira que coloca o nome de orçamento participativo é a cidade de Porto Alegre, né? E a cidade de Porto Alegre vai organizando a metodologia de orçamento participativo com o nome já de OP. E no outro extremo do país, no Ceará, no Nordeste do Brasil, começa-se uma outra organização, e essa organização com os movimentos em luta do direito à cidade, da discussão sobre política urbana. O Yves já está envolvido e mora nesse período no Brasil, um período em Fortaleza. Ele faz parte de uma ONG chamada Ceará, e essa ONG apoia um novo prefeito que assume uma cidade que tinha sido que acabou de ser emancipada, né? E essa cidade emancipada começa a desenvolver também mecanismos de orçamento participativo. E o Yves passa a organizar e ajudar essa ONG, junto nesse processo de construção da metodologia do orçamento participativo. né? Aí eu vou ter mais fotos aí para colocar. E o marco que eu trago aqui como importante é a realização do primeiro Fórum Social Mundial, onde um espaço onde várias lideranças no mundo se organizam e participam, e o orçamento participativo de Porto Alegre começa a ter uma projeção. E nós conseguimos começar a ter esse debate internacional sobre a democracia participativa envolvendo as experiências brasileiras. Aí pode passar, por favor. O Yves começa a despontar aqui, eu coloco como pesquisador e articulador, mas na realidade é muito mais um militante dessa política, nos ajudando a organizar processos de cooperação horizontais entre cidades. E aí a gente tem o orçamento participativo que era desenvolvido no estado de São Paulo, tinha um espaço que era o Fórum Paulista de Participação Social, que realizava uma vez por ano um encontro que nós chamávamos de Repensando o AP, trazendo a oportunidade das cidades e seus coordenadores e os seus representantes populares discutirem os desafios e questões que eram significativas para aquelas experiências naquele momento, né? Pode passar, por favor. E o Repensando o Orçamento Participativo, ele tinha um alcance muito no estado de São Paulo, né? E aí, com a Urbal, que foi um projeto de cooperação internacional entre cidades europeias e cidades latino-americanas, nós tivemos a oportunidade de reunir outras cidades do país e criou, a partir de uma provocação do Yves, criou a necessidade de um processo de troca de experiências mais forte entre as cidades brasileiras. E aí foi a criação da Rede Brasileira aí no ano de 2007 na cidade de Belo Horizonte, né? A partir da criação da rede, a rede começa a buscar outros tipos de parceria, buscando esse processo de cooperação internacional, e aí a gente faz o primeiro contato com as cidades africanas em Marrakech, em 2009, né? E esse processo que aconteceu em 2009, ele vai aquecendo e gerando a oportunidade que na Rio+20, nós tivemos a oportunidade de construir uma oficina, e o Yves esteve à frente disso, e nós ficamos 3 meses construindo essa oficina. A ideia que essa oficina ela pudesse ser um espaço prático de construção de metodologias de orçamento participativo, né, com o envolvimento de todas as lideranças. Então, foram 3 meses de muito debate, de muita construção, mas o resultado disso foi muito bonito, né? A gente pôde ver as pessoas, os gestores brasileiros e africanos juntos, construindo possibilidades de propostas de orçamento participativo, de metodologias, né, a partir dessa interação. Então, foi um processo muito rico, assim, que eu trago como exemplo dessa pujança, dessa relação que o Yves tinha com as cidades brasileiras. Pode passar, por favor. Muito relevante foi os processos de sistematização das experiências, né? O volume de desafios que as cidades brasileiras se colocavam eram muito grandes. E havia pouco tempo disponível para que a gente pudesse registrar e analisar, a partir desses registros, os avanços e os desafios que as experiências estavam enfrentando. Então, a partir dessas provocações, desses formulários que o Yves mandava, a gente começou a construir essa sistematização. Aí pode passar. E um desses frutos foi esse livro, né, os 72 perguntas frequentes sobre orçamento participativo. Esse lançamento eu ainda não estou próxima do Yves, né? Isso é em 2004, mas a partir da segunda edição, que ele faz um processo de revisão, de revisitar todas essas questões, né? Porque o processo é muito vivo e intenso. Eu pude participar dessa construção coletiva dele, né? Do diálogo que ele fazia com as cidades, para que ele pudesse trazer em cada resposta das perguntas colocadas, né, elementos de todas as cidades brasileiras que estavam naquele momento realizando suas experiências, né? Pode passar, por favor. E aqui uma foto que me emocionou muito, né? É uma foto que mostra a equipe dessa ONG Ceará lá no começo dos anos 80, aquecendo o debate, né? E aí a gente traz o depoimento dessas duas lideranças que trabalharam com o Ives nos anos 80 na construção da ONG e também da metodologia do orçamento participativo de Capuí. Aí pode passar para o próximo, que aí eu vou trabalhando também. E aqui uma foto que é muito emblemática, importante, né? Que é a forma com que o prefeito, na época, José Ailton Celílio, coloca a prestação de contas. Então, além do processo de construção nas periferias da cidade, ele fazia um processo de prestação de contas no muro da sua casa e nos muros dos órgãos públicos da cidade, né? Então, é uma foto que simboliza muito bem esse valor, essa importância do orçamento participativo nas cidades brasileiras e como o Yves fez parte dessa história. Pode passar, por favor. Aqui uma foto também numa outra escala, que é a cooperação entre redes, né? Então, para além dessa cooperação entre cidades, a gente começou a trabalhar no fortalecimento de redes nacionais. Então, aqui um debate, um momento de debate entre a rede brasileira e a rede argentina, na cidade de Correntes, interior da Argentina, em 2011. Pode passar. Aí, quase fechando, né? Aqui uma outra foto bastante emocionante, porque, embora a foto às vezes não traga toda essa emoção, a entrega de uma obra do orçamento participativo, que é o caso aqui na primeira foto, a gente tem o Yves e a Claudineia Jacinto, que é uma das gestoras do orçamento participativo da cidade de Belo Horizonte, no OP, uma entrega do OP Habitação, que era uma modalidade específica para as questões ligadas à questão habitacional. Então, todas essas entregas, elas têm um grau de envolvimento, de acompanhamento das lideranças, e no caso de Belo Horizonte, essas lideranças se organizavam num espaço chamado Com Força, que eram as comissões de fiscalização de acompanhamento das obras, né? Então, tudo era feito com muito envolvimento com a sociedade, e a entrega sempre era um momento bastante festivo e bastante emocionante. E aí a gente tem esse momento com o Yves. E em seguida, abaixo, uma foto com a Claudineia e o Yves, e aí o Alegrete junto com a gente também, numa atividade do Fórum Urbano Mundial, com a rede brasileira, Cláudia, representando a rede brasileira nesse momento. Mais uma, por favor, e a última. E aqui eu encerro dizendo um pouco da importância dessa construção toda, né? Eu acho que todo esse processo nosso vem na luta da construção de um outro mundo possível, sabe? Então, a gente está aqui tentando mostrar que outra sociedade é possível, que outra democracia é possível com a nossa participação efetiva. E aí são momentos como esse que trazem energia para a gente enfrentar os desafios, como implementar o orçamento participativo federal no Brasil, com todos os desafios que estão sendo colocados. É olhando para essa história que a gente acaba tendo mais força para poder enfrentar aí os desafios colocados na construção do orçamento participativo federal no âmbito do Brasil, que tem uma dimensão territorial bastante significativa para uma metodologia como essa, mas é a nossa meta. Obrigada. Agradeço muito essa oportunidade de estar aqui com vocês.
Obrigada. You read and I will complete this video.
Okay, so Katja was quite emotional because it was it's a story that for her touches her deeply. So she started by mentioning that, and also started talking about the story of participatory budgeting, how it started from the peripheries of the cities in Brazil, where the locations of vulnerability and the struggles from grassroots groups based on these localities to bring human rights to marginalized territories. And across Brazil, there's these articulations that were happening, promoting participatory democracy in different fronts. And in 1989 is when an experience in Porto Alegre started in calling itself participatory budgeting, focused on the democratization of budgeting. At more or less the same time, when Yves was already in Brazil, he was working in an NGO in Ceará, in the northeast of Brazil, called Ceará Periferia, Ceará Periphery, and where there was a series of initiatives there of participatory democracy, and where participatory budgeting was one of those aspects that was included. Then there was the World Social Forum in 2001, that was also a very important milestone, and where these experiences from Brazil started to become shared more internationally with other groups. She sees Yves not only as a mobilizer, a broker, but as a militant, which was really trying to push this agenda forward through city-to-city cooperations within Brazil, but also internationally. And in this, she talks about the experience in São Paulo, that was the Forum Paulista, who started to bring together different cities across Brazil to disseminate the experience of participatory budgeting. Then there was the formation of a Brazilian network of cities that were introducing participatory budgeting in 2007, and the collaborations with African cities has become very, very important. And that led to a workshop in the Rio +20 in 2012 that involved Brazilian and African cities. There was a 3 months preparation with a lot of grassroots actors that was very inspiring, and which led to this workshop at the Rio +20, which was very meaningful as a form of exchanging and internationalizing the experience of participatory budgeting. Then there was a lot of efforts of systematizations as well that was very important for his practice. There was a publication she shared in 2004 of the 72 questions about participatory budgeting that was published by UN Habitats. And then there was a second edition that required revising, which is where Katia engaged with this revision, going back with questionnaires to different cities to ask how the process was going, and really trying to get this updated version, because it was a very dynamic space. She shared a couple of pictures from Ceará Periferia, from the time when he was based there, and there was a statement from a staff member from there that was working with him. There was also a picture of the wall of a mayor of a city that was implementing participatory budgeting with all the data, with accountability. Something that Yves was involved in, that type of transparent accountability initiatives. And then also she shared there was another picture around city, not only city-to-city cooperation, but networks, so involving networks in Argentina and Brazil. So there was a really interesting network-to-network experiences. Then there was the moment of delivery of any participatory budgeting process was a very meaningful space, a place of festivity. And she shared one about the housing participatory budgeting experience in Belo Horizonte, where there was this moment of delivering the houses that were built through the funds of the participatory budgeting, and he was present in that, and there was a picture of that. It was great to have him involved in that space, and there was a picture from the Urbanism Forum as well, where Giovanni Allegretti was already in that picture, and there was also another moment which was in Rio, and the exchange on that. The dream now is to push participatory budgeting to the national scale, to do a kind of national, and really thinking about these experiences. It's really important to energize the efforts to bring participatory budgeting to the national level.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we need.
We're running out of time.
Very quick.
Yeah, just to say that actually Yves founded an NGO in Fortaleza, and they were very engaged in self-building housing. That was really relevant on that point, and that periphery that start in Fortaleza. Now there is a colleague of Yves that is working in Brussels, and there is another periphery, so in Brussels, and Patrick is the one that is leading the process. And yeah, so
thank you so much, Cecilia, for this additional information. Thank you, obrigada, Katia, for all this really important work of giving us the history and also the story of the expansion and diffusion of PV, where it played quite an important brokering role. On the story of national PV, there's quite a few countries where that's happening, and in particular at the moment in Angola, we wanted to have our colleague Alan Kane to speak to this experience, because this is one where he was literally just working on, but unfortunately Alan is on a plane right now. So now we're going to move to China, which is one of those frontiers of PV, and we're really happy to have with us Ming Zhuang, with whom Yves worked very closely. Ming is the founder of Participation Center in China, specializing in citizen engagement, inequality, and participatory budgeting. Thank you very much, Ming, for joining us.
Well, thanks very much. I'm Ming. I'm joining online from China, and our organization is called Participation Center. We work on citizen engagement and local democracy. I had the privilege of knowing Yves as a colleague, as a board member of our organization, and a mentor and a dear friend for our team for over, I think, nearly 2 decades. The first time I met with Yves was actually before 2008, when he was in China for a UN conference on forced eviction. When I was preparing to translate his manual of the 72 frequent questions and answers of participatory budgeting into Chinese, and later we get it published in this manual in China. And later, when we had this participatory budgeting practice in Chengdu, in my home city, we worked a lot with Yves on researching and presenting our experiences to the world about our participatory budgeting when it was very little known to the world. The participatory budgeting we have in Chengdu might be the largest participatory budgeting experiment in terms of the annual budget and the number of city residents engaged with it. It was largely invisible to the international participatory budgeting community, but Yves changed that. He came to work with us. He listened. He did field works. He did research, and he worked with us to advocate with local government officials. And we co-authored a paper presenting the Chengdu's participatory budgeting experience to the world, in the view of the world, published in 2014. Yves didn't stop there. He joined the board of our organization, Participation Center. Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. And for over a decade, he was in a constant presence with us, offering us guides, bringing us international perspectives, and most important, believing what we are trying to do and helping us to achieve that. Well, next slide. Well, the participatory budgeting in Chengdu was actually, for me, is extraordinary. Over 4,300 villages and communities, covering 21 or 22 millions of residents, among which we estimate around 15 millions of citizens engage directly or indirectly in the whole process. And there was an annual budget of about 230 million US dollars, with an annual projects numbered between 20,000 to 30,000 in the rural and urban areas of the municipality of Chengdu. And these are not just about numbers. It helped us understand and redesign the whole process of this participatory budgeting, from village assembly proposals all the way through to the last step annual evaluations, and helped us to achieve our local democratic innovation and participatory budgeting. That is when we could develop in China with our own innovation and made it possible for us to share with the world, not just to learn from the world. So we are very glad we are working on participatory budgeting, from a catching up experiment to contribute to the global participatory budgeting knowledges. This is one of the greatest Yves' gift to us. And beyond this research and field work on participatory budgeting is the support that Yves has offered us. As an organization working on local democracy and citizen engagement in a very challenging context, it has never been an easy thing to carry forward. But Yves helped us. In those moments, Yves showed up, he stood with us, he continued working with us, writing references, joining our events, and spent his time working our policy papers, advocacy policy papers, and presenting to the local governments. And he's speaking up publicly about the value of our experiences in China to the international community. Well, he brought us help. He helped us to see the value of what we were doing and we have been carrying out in Chengdu and beyond China, and made our experiences part of the global story, global community of local democracy and participatory budgeting. Well, through Yves' network, we have been a part of the global PB network with partners from Brazil, from Indonesia, from Africa, with international organizations like IOPD, etc. And so in terms of the isolation for us in China because of Yves, we feel relieved, and we know that we have always been a part of something larger than the setbacks we had in China. So next slide. So moving forward, in his last years, Yves and I have been discussing about AI application in participatory budgeting. Actually, just a few days before he left us, we were discussing on Zoom about how to promote the AI application with IOPD, with partners in Africa. Yves was very excited about the potential of AI, not as a technology shortcut, but as a way to deepen local democracy, to make PB more inclusive and informed and more accountable. So 1 year after that, we had made some advancements towards this path. And I would like to propose what we can do for Yves and in memory of Yves. Yves had wrote prolifically with papers, books, field notes, teaching materials, and lectures across his decades of work on 5 continents of the world in quite several languages. Those languages should not sit in archives. It should be alive and accessible. It should be accessible to a villager council, maybe in Senegal, maybe to a PhD student in Brazil, or to a community organizer in China. So what we can do now is to digitize his work, structure it into a multi-language knowledge base, and make it available through a retrieval augmented generation powered by AI interface, so that everyone can ask on the computer, on his cell phone, about how did Yves approach PB in post-conflict cities, or what did Yves see about including women in participatory budgeting, and get grounded, sourced answers from Yves' words. So his mentorship was so extraordinary when he was with us. And through this AI-powered knowledge base, his mentorship can continue at a global scale and for the next generation. And based on this knowledge base, and we could build it into a large language model supported deliberation, AI-driven performance and evaluation tools for the PB. And furthermore, we could develop open source AI tools and share the benchmarks augmented by the AI computing powers, and ensure that AI could serve the most majority of the citizens. So this is what I propose, and in memory of Yves, to preserve his knowledge and amplify his research and continue his work. And I will keep going of what we have been discussing with Yves, and I will reach out to Adriel and to our partners in Africa and in Southeast Asia to explore the AI application of PB worldwide, and to make Yves' knowledge be embedded in our knowledge base and in the knowledge of participatory budgeting for many, many years. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your inputs and for charting a possible way forward. I'm sure there will be many different approaches and views on this, but certainly you've put a proposal on the table. So for that, thank you so much. So I'm aware that we are slightly behind time. We still have two inputs which are taking us into slightly different direction, much more global in the sense in that multi-located. One is from the first will be from our colleague Giovanni Allegretti, who is senior researcher at the Center for Social Studies, University of Coimbra, and a specialist of participatory budgeting across more than 50 countries. Giovanni is joining us from Italy in quite difficult personal circumstances. So thank you so much, Giovanni, for joining. And apologies if I'm asking you to be quite succinct in this input. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I wanted to be present, so even when with difficulties, I try to be here. The only thing is that I didn't have energy and time to prepare anything written or graphic, but I saw that some images of things that I wanted to show were in the previous interventions of Katia and John. I met Yves a long time ago in '98 when he was working for the GPU ALC in the United Nations, and at the time I was a student in doing my PhD in Porto Alegre, so that was the place where I met him. And then soon after, I decided to organize some courses to train local authorities in Portugal. In Italy, on participatory budgeting, and I invited Yves as a relevant speaker for the first training week on participatory budgeting in the mountain of Trentino Alto Adige. And from that moment on, followed a huge friendship that lasted many years, traveling around many places together. And I wanted to stop on specifically some of these places, just to do a reflection about the fact that Yves was a visionary person, no? I think John said a co-conspirator in some cases, no? So because he wanted to change the framework, not only the processes it was dealing with. So changing participatory budget, it wasn't changing the politics when it was to be embedded. And I think that this being a visionary is very important in the huge networks he have been part and also animator of, because there is always the need to have someone also in the research world. He was part of the research world in the majority of years that I have been working with him. I also gave lecture with him in Harvard and in other places, and it was for me important to have someone that was always pushing the bar further, ahead of what was already happening. So I think that it was very important for him to identify an example that was a little bit different, that moved something forward, and stick to these events or to this place in order to show the potential of something going beyond what participatory budgeting was already doing in the other places. So for me, this idea that he had in mind, the participatory budgeting has a lot of potential more than how it's being used in this moment, was important to make it evolve constantly further on. And in this idea of pushing the limits of participatory budgeting, one dimension was related to the fact that he viewed participatory budgeting with these three big dimensions. One dimension that is more, how to say, instrumental, to change something, the transformative dimension in relation to policies and to territories, but also the dimension related to transforming the people who was participating. So there was an episode systemic dimension that was important, building together new knowledge and transferring knowledge from different actors to others. And the third element, it's the relational one. Participatory budgeting is a space where it's possible to build alliances to eventually obtain results outside the process itself if the instrumental dimension does not work, because sometimes the conditions are not perfect. You can have a political institution that promises something that will not be delivering. But if participatory budgeting worked well as a space for building alliance, the thing can happen outside it, no, in the political fight, in a larger political fight. And the fact that these three dimensions coexisted, it was very important for him to accept some small handicap of some of the experience he was working on. And I wanted to stop on two geographies where I have been meeting him in the last 7-8 years, that were, for example, Russia and Uzbekistan. No, so two areas when we saw a picture with the Russian colleagues of the World Bank in John's images, and I think that what is important of these two contexts is a dimension that we could call the subsidiarity dimension of participatory budgeting. The idea that participatory budgeting cannot grow necessarily alone, just coming out from the political will of some political authorities or the fight of some movements, but there could be also a way to push it ahead through, for example, the multi-level political relation between the state, the region, the local authorities. I think that in the smallest scale, this was something that he studies together with Miguel Grassa very much in Lisbon, the city where he has been living in the last decade and more. And especially looking to the possibility of integration of the participatory budgeting in the urban district, where there are autonomous presidents with their political will, and the city. Because sometimes the participatory budgeting of Lisbon did not deliver properly its own promises, because it was incapable of dialogue with the smaller tiers of the city. And so with Miguel Grassa, he had been working on the idea that participatory budgeting can better deliver its promises if the different political level work on an agreement to implementing the things that have been co-decided with people. In a larger scale, I think the case of Russia, I remember him in St. Petersburg and in Bashkortostan, in Ufa, where we have been given some several days of lecture and helping the local expert to elaborate methodologies for the specific context, because Yves loved to adapt, to tailor the process, the general ideas of the process to specific context. And the idea in this case was to appreciate a thing that maybe is not imaginable in a country like Russia, which is for other reason near autocratic behavior, but was the collaboration between the Ministry of Finance of the national government of Russia, together with more than 50 regions, oblasts in the country, and the municipality. So the idea that three level working together could deliver something that had not all the 100% characteristic of participatory budgeting, because the larger context was partially autocratic, but the idea that anyway participatory budgeting could be a learning space for democracy. And he was very careful in using words in these spaces, because he knew that talking too much about democracy and participatory budgeting in this space could be harmful for the process itself and for the colleagues that were working on it. So he was talking about other dimension of effectiveness of policies, of inclusion of sub-represented groups, but he thought that even in this context, participatory budgeting really do something that was not just make-up, but was real democracy at grassroots level. And in fact, Yves was also helping a colleague, Lev Shilov, that was doing in St. Petersburg a thesis on participatory budgeting in authoritarian regimes, which is a very important study, because now that our democracy are backsliding somehow, it's very important to understand what even in this changing context, participatory budgeting can give. And in this subsidiarity aspect, so starting something at the level closer to the people, but then growing through the help of other level, it has been taking care of this in different countries. Someone spoke about Angola. That was not possible to have Alan here today, but I had the luck to and the big responsibilities with Miguel Grassa, Roberto Falanga, and Nelson Diaz to try to make survive one of his last projects in Angola on improving the quality of the legislation that Angola have on participatory budgeting, but it played almost ineffectively in the last year, but it has a lot of potential. And so working on this still uncompleted or unexplored potential, it's something that for Yves was very important in his visionary dimension. And I wanted to today, others, for example, the World Bank, through the work of Nelson Diaz, are continuing parts of his work in Uzbekistan, that now is one of the biggest participatory budgeting around the world, protected also more than 18 million of people voting every year, and joining, putting together small localities with the support of the national state. And it's very important. For example, for Yves was from the beginning very important the regulatory dimension, how this perspective could be, and this process could be protected through clear legislation that could help the process to be installed and continued and be given sustainability. So the last thing I wanted to say, yes, I finished.
Thank you.
I finished.
Yes, thank you
don't
so
worry.
much.
The last image, it's linked to an image that John has shown us, and it was a proposal that Yves did in the World Urban Forum in 2020 in Abu Dhabi, and was about transforming the participatory budgeting from a local tool to a global tool for global environmental justice. And the idea was simple, was creating twinnings among the cities of the north and of the south for working together on a specific dimension that maybe Adria will take care of, that is the participatory budgeting applied to the climate change and adaptation. And the idea was, why don't we make the city dialogue? The north is a big polluter, the south is Spain for pollution happening in the north. If the cities can work together, and their population in some moment of the process can work together to discuss measures for reducing the climate change impact, we could transform participatory budgeting in a tool of global environmental justice. I think this vision was very very imaginific, and it represents the last phase of work of Yves very, very well. The idea that the potential are there, we could do more, and we have to try to do more. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Giovanni. Yes, so much new emerging ideas that were coming from Yves at the end, and that we have a responsibility to take forward. We are coming to our last speaker. Adria, thank you so much for your patience, and apologies for the extra time that we've been taking in this session. But it was we thought it would be very important to have your voice, Adria, the voice of multilateral, local and regional governments, really to help illustrate Yves' strategic vision, which was, let's not just focus on these innovative, interesting pilots, but really think also about scale and institutionalization of change processes. So Adria, maybe just very few words, because I'm sure everybody now is in need of a bit of a break, of a pause before we go into our last session. Thank you so much, Adria, for your input. I forgot to say who Adria is. Adria Duarte is coordinator of UCLG's Committee on Social Inclusion, Participatory Democracy and Human Rights, and he's also coordinator of the International Observatory of Participatory Democracy, OIDP, that we've heard about this afternoon. Thank you, Adria.
Thank you, Barbara, and hello everyone. And I also want to thank you all for organizing this well-deserved tribute and seminar, because I think we're learning a lot again still from Yves. So thank you. Yeah, I think we can move to the next slide. So yeah, I had the privilege of working with Yves on many occasions as a juror of the OIDP Award, as a keynote speaker at our conferences, during field visits in places like, that has been mentioned, Brazil, in Mexico, in Malaysia, in Russia, or Cote d'Ivoire, among other places. And of course, as a co-author of publications and co-organizer of webinars. I'm going to be really quick, but just to highlight some of the qualities that became evident through working with him and that make him truly unique. First, I think his commitment to understanding reality on the ground. Yves never believed that participation could be understood from a distance. He traveled, as it has been, many things has been mentioned, but I want to highlight against it. He visited neighborhoods, he spoke with the residents, with community leaders and local officials, always trying to understand how participation was actually changing people's life. Second, of course, his intellectual rigor. Those of us who were with him as a juror know how seriously he took every evaluation. He read every application carefully, looked beyond the narrative, and always asked difficult but necessary questions. What are the real impact of the projects? Who was benefiting from them? How many resources were actually being allocated? So always these key figures of the dollar per inhabitant, or the dollar per inhabitant integrating the revenue per capita for each PB process. And was the process really transforming local governance, or simply creating consultation space? Next slide. Yves had a remarkable capacity to combine qualitative and quantitative analysis. He was fascinated by stories and experiences, but he's also paid, as I was saying, close attention to data. He examined forms, reports, and indicators with the same attention that he gave to conversations with people in the field. He wanted evidence, but evidence connected to people's reality. So it has been also mentioning, I'm sorry, because I'm going to be repeating many of the ideas that has been already mentioned, but he was always advocating to bring the participatory budgeting agenda in the international forum or debates, whether it was at the World Urban Forums, in conferences, in meetings, or academic spaces. He brought local experiences into the global discussions and help connect practitioners, researchers, and local governments from different regions in the world. He helped us discover, explore, and even introduce, I would say, that PB in many places in the world. It has been mentioned in Southeast Asia, in Angola, in Cameroon, in Central Asia, like Uzbekistan. With that, of course, forgetting experiences in Latin America and in Europe. We can move to the next slide. This approach is reflected in many publications through his career. Yves was interested. Yes, this one is one of the pictures also that has been mentioned in the World Urban Forum of 2020 that Giovanni were mentioning also. Through his career, Yves was interested not only on how participatory budgeting functions, but in its real transformative capacity. So it has been mentioned also in his recent work. He explored, maybe we can move to the next slide. He explored how participatory budgeting could contribute to climate adaptation and mitigation, demonstrating that democratic participation can help communities respond to one of the greatest challenges of our times. And as Giovanni was mentioning, also as using PB as a way to introduce global environmental justice through decentralized cooperation between cities from the global north and the global south. One of his last contributions with us was prepared for the 7 Goal Report and was focused on the relationship between participatory budgeting and the notion of care. On concrete, the paper was expanding the notion of care, participatory budgeting as an enabler of care-based local development. where he invited us to understand participation not simply as a democratic procedure, but as a way of strengthening social bonds, collective responsibility, and care within our communities. It has been also mentioned, I think, not just studying PV at itself, but really the connection with other like other frameworks, other realities, and also trying to explore the potential of participatory budgeting. To me, these contributions perfectly reflect Yves' lifelong approach, always connecting the local realities with global challenges, while never losing sight of the people behind the data and to concrete impacts behind the discourse. In many ways, Yves was not only studying participatory budgeting, but he was helping all of us understand what meaningful democratic transformations look like and real transformation of urban reality. For that and for his generosity, curiosity, rigor, and commitment, we owe him a profound debt of gratitude. Thank you.
Andrea, thank you so much for these last few words and for this very rapid overview. I think we will leave questions for after the break because everybody is quite, we need a bit of a break in this hot room here in Senate House in London. But luckily this event is recorded, and I think, as you mentioned very rightly, Andrea, there is so much still to be learned from it. And I think a lot of the conversations we've had today, the publications that are being shared, will continue to nourish us for years to come. So thank you so much, all of you, for your inputs. We're going to have a break now, a short break of 15 minutes, and then we'll come back for the urban agriculture session. So thanks a lot.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, everyone. We're back in the room now. Is it? Good. Hey, hello, everyone. We're going to be starting the part on urban agriculture, which was another one of Yves' big interest. First of all, I'm very honored to be participating today. Yves was a great friend of mine and a real inspiration for my work. And so, yeah, thank you for thinking about me to chair this session. I met Yves a little over 7 years ago now at the book launch, actually, Integrating Food into Urban Planning, a book that he edited with Cecília Delgado. I'm going to weave in the speakers' introductions as well into that so that we can make it faster because our interpreters do need to leave eventually and we've got limited time. So Cecília Delgado is an urban food planning expert at the FAO, and she's supporting cities on food systems and food security and informal food economies. And with Yves, they've been real cornerstone of food planning, which is a big missing part of urban planning in general. And so after going to that book launch, which was fascinating, I went the next day to Zeremariam Frey's lecture, and he was teaching a module on urban and peri-urban agriculture at the time. And I was taking that class because I just started my PhD, and it was an interesting class. And Zeri had invited Yves that day to talk about several things. Yves talked to us about the food, fuel, and finance nexus. He also talked to us about land grabbing in different countries. And he had this very interesting way of capturing land grabbing by comparing it to the size of Portugal. And he would be explaining to us how in Congo, in DRC, there was 1.5 Portugal grabbed. In Brazil, it was 0.75 Portugals grabbed that year. And it was extremely easy to understand every time Yves was explaining anything. After that, so we continued chatting with Yves, and I had to go through my upgrade process as part of the PhD, and I wasn't that particularly confident, and I wanted to look into the case of community land trust. I was interested by it, and Yves really introduced me to his friends in Letchworth. And I didn't know any one of them. I just arrived in Letchworth railway station, not knowing anyone, and people picked me up and brought me to several allotments and community gardens, and we had lunch, and it was lovely. And these people had no interest in doing this, apart that they were friends of Yves, and they wanted to help me. And Yves was just really good at making these kind of solidarities happening. And through that, I also met Philip Ross, who was the ex-mayor of Letchworth. And he's a chartered engineer, is also a long-standing garden city expert, and he also co-edited a book with Yves on planning the garden cities of tomorrow. A fascinating read. So, despite all that work on Letchworth, I actually didn't end up taking Letchworth as a case study, but I'm glad, I visited all these places. And what was really fascinating was to just understand how urban agriculture is never really about growing food, but it's about building all these kind of solidarities, having it rooted into one space where people can just practice what it is, what it means to advance the rights to the city together. Years went forward, and then COVID eventually hit, and then we had to actually move teaching to online. And with Robert Beale, who's present here, we had to teach the Food and the City module together with Yves. And it was really fascinating. Robert was here as a professor of political ecology and urban food systems at the DPU. And he really specializes in systems theory, agroecology, and sustainable urban food systems. And with Yves' very practical experience and my kind of more recent theoretical learning, because I was in my literature review, we had a very great team, and it worked really well. And so eventually teaching continued, and eventually I came across some brilliant master students, because I was a teaching assistant on another course. And this master student is now doing a PhD at DPU, and he worked extensively with Yves. And soon going to be a doctor, hopefully. This master student is now Francisco Garcia Gonzalez, and he's also an FAO consultant who's specializing in food justice in Latin America. So from all of that conversations, we continued having chats about continuing food system research at the DPU, and we had often food cluster events. And at one of these clusters in 2023 presented 8 hypotheses that I think are still very valid in terms of the future of food and the future of food research. And the first one, that food struggles, they're catalysts for broader social movements. And these broader social movements are able to win political elections. And we need to have utopias and these new utopias. And he talked about the example of Zapatistas, but also examples in Mexico of Iztapalapa municipality, where it started as a food intervention and then became a political movement, and then it won elections. And these new utopias can actually win elections. So that was 2 of his points. And the fact that agroecological systems carry a lot more resilience was an evident one. And another one that was linked to that is how COVID actually revealed that the kind of mutual aid emerging from all these networks was so powerful. And it made the food system extremely resilient. And to make it even more resilient, we had to work on rebuilding the broken nexus between producers and consumers. We had to look in different vehicles for recommoning, and community land trust was one of them. But we also had to look at alternative kind of spaces and tools, such as digital tools. And these all hypotheses resonated with everyone in the room, and it made perfect sense. And that's what Yves was particularly good at. He was able to make connections between everyone's different work, identifying specific patterns, and building solidarity. There was always this word solidarity at the center of his practice. And he had this capacity to value everyone's expertise and to capture the element of the discourse, to kind of carry on this fighting spirit that people had, this kind of struggle. He was very much a revolutionary at heart to some extent, and he very much had also a franc-parler, a truth to how he was expressing himself. And I remember one of my earlier conversations with him was on Singapore urban agriculture policies, and he just told me that it was bullshit. That was his summary. He was not afraid of being confrontational, which is quite rare in Anglo-Saxon academic settings, and it's quite refreshing. So thank you to all of you for being there. Thank you to Yves for his inspiration. And now I want to focus this part on the kind of elements that we were looking at when teaching the Food in the City course, which were the commons with agroecology and food sovereignty. So to do that, Zere will first speak to Yves' contribution on understanding the commons, land reclamation, and pastoralist resilience, and how traditional forms of collective land stewardship are not relics of the past, but true living alternatives of healthy socio-ecological systems and resilient ones. And we will have Philip speak to Yves' thinking on community land trust, rebuilding producer-consumer nexuses, and the resurgence of commons in urban planning, connecting these garden city traditions to contemporary urban planning debates. We will then have Robert speak to us about agroecology as a political practice and an alternative cosmovision, a way of resisting the entropy of capitalism and its corporate agriculture regime. Then Francisco will speak about food sovereignty, how it's concretely done at the neighborhood scale with the case of community kitchens and the different rural-urban solidarities emerging. And then we will have Cecilia closing the session, who will speak about Yves' contribution in terms of embedding urban agriculture in food policy and governance. So thank you, and please, Zere.
Slides, yeah, I can show them. You're going to show the slides, okay. Okay. Thanks all. I just want to say, first of all, I mean, a lot of the things which have been said, I've said what I would like to say, you know, in many ways. And all the acknowledgement, the things amazing. I've learned also a lot about Yves. I'm slightly on the rural side of things, you know. I always criticize DPU to be more urban in its focus. So I'm one of the few people who brought the rural part in reality, you know, which is not a surprise because that reflects the environment I come from. The urban and rural linkage has been very strong. And I think to indoctrinate the students, so to use that word, on urban planning only is probably, given the world, the climate change, the changes which are happening in the peri-urban environment and the challenges. I think accommodating that has been one of my greatest, hopefully, contributions with Robert, with Yves. And what I want to say here, just I want to give you a little bit more.
Sorry. But I totally agree with you. And the bottom line was that Yves and yourself really worked for DPU to have these rural-urban linkages and city-region food system understanding at the DPU. And I thought, yeah, that was very clear. Like the cities cannot survive on themselves, and the identities and the cultures that still make city life possible and the kind of everyday resistance mechanisms that are happening are based on histories and long traditions in the rural. And that was evident in Yves' work. Thank you. Can we now move to Philip, please?
Okay. Thank you very much. Bonjour and ni hao to me. Was introduced. I've spoken lots of time. All over the world, and I've written down here with my co-conspirator, exactly the same as John, Yves, because I felt that we're going out causing trouble partly, and actually creating solutions, which is why I enjoyed it so much. So I find it odd today to be here without him, though I feel that he's in the corner, listening, supporting, and encouraging, just as he's always done to actually do that. And that's the great thing that he did. I kind of think, how did you get somebody like me who's working? His day job is in IT. I mean, yesterday I was presenting to the nuclear regulator, right? You know, so this is kind of a different gig for me. How do you get me involved to do these things? So I'm going to tell you a bit of that story, how it got me involved and what we've been doing and how it's kind of inspired me, and I think how he's tried to use me to inspire other people going around us for doing things. So I first met Yves back in 2009 when Robert and Yves both came to lecture us around the city. And at the time, I wasn't there. And the next slide. I need to do that. Oh, there you go. That's actually on the day we actually met. I think I'm looking a lot younger. Yves somehow managed to look the same age all the time, doesn't he? You know, it didn't seem to age at all. I think it came on Saturday, the 14th of February, which was Valentine's Day. And I didn't realise that this was going to be the start of a fresh passion that we're going to develop together for social justice and the community stuff that we would do. And at the time, I was having this really hard time as the mayor of Letchworth. I challenged the charity landlord that controlled the assets in the town. And I'd said that instead of addressing deprivation or poverty in the town, they'd been giving loads of money to the private golf club. And instead of electing governors, they'd gone and appointed them. And instead of listening to people, anyone criticised them, they bullied them. So I had just questioned their priorities, challenged how they would run, criticised their behaviour. And you can see why me and Eve got on so well, actually. So as a consequence, I was getting bullied and intimidated. I was getting all these letters telling me what a bad person I was. You know, your mailbox fills up. And this whole thing was playing out in the press, and I was embarrassed by it all. Of course, to Eve, of course, it's natural territory, isn't it? You know, naturally where we'd expect to actually be. So they come, and Robert probably remembers, I'm doing this presentation on the history of the Garden City architecturally and everything like that, and going through Ebenezer Howard, and this is what the houses look like, which is all very good. And my assistant of the council, the chief exec, she prepared the slides for me, and I was delivering them. And then halfway through, one of the students put their hand up and said, Philip, we know what's going on in Letchworth. I said, what? He said, with the High Court, you've been taken to the High Court, we know all about this. And I was like dying of embarrassment. And then Eve said, this is a great struggle. He said, why don't you tell us? I'm a paraphrase. He said, tell us about it. So I did. And so I threw away my slides and everything I was talking on. And I started to talk about, let's go off on it. And I started talking about land ownership being the key on this, and about the diggers movement in the UK, about food and all these things. I started to wrap up and everything in there. And that we felt that the town belonged to the many, not the few, that the prosperity should be shared out amongst them. This was the Garden City idea. I think I said there was a dream that was Letchworth, and this isn't it. You know, this isn't what's going on. I felt we were standing on this burning deck on this fight. And at the end of the session, Yves came and he said, this was brilliant what you just said. He says, I'm doing this RUAF trip with UNESCO, and we're going to China, to Wuhan, actually, which I've never heard of then, but we all know where it is now. And to talk about food and land. And I said, well, what do you want me to say? And he said, exactly what you've just said. I said, I haven't got any of that written down. So he said, just say it with the same passion that you've just said it. So I remember we corresponded, and he wrote me this first email about how pleased he was to have come to Letchworth. And he said, you know, and like the lady showed earlier, the one from Istanbul, and he said, keep up the struggle. These are the things I've always fought for. And I remember going back to the town clerk and I said, I don't think we are the baddies after all. I think we are the goodies on this, and we're getting people on it. And I felt really sort of G'd up, because after getting all this negative, then you got someone like Eve who come and said, yes, you're doing the right thing. I thought, yes, we are definitely on the right side. So we corresponded. He said, write up these principles that you talked about in the when you spoke. And so we and over time, we wrote these up as a set of principles for the Garden City and added to them. If you go to the next slide, eventually we turned this into this little Garden Cities of Tomorrow manifesto. And if you see in there, we blended in the idea of food, the idea of participatory budgeting, and all of these things were kind of blended in. And I did say to Eve, I said, but I'm not an academic. I don't know how to write stories. He goes, no, just write what you think is what should be done. He said, let's kind of harness some of this up. And then, of course, Eve then illustrated with examples all over the world where these things were actually taking place, which was the real strength of what we put together. And when we talked about garden cities, we very much said about it's two sides on the coin. There's a planning and architectural side, and on the other side is the social principles. And we felt that, you know, the history of the garden city needs to incorporate those social principles, not just talking about charity and paternalism, but people have a right to the city, which I didn't understand already. And over these years, I've understood more. Right? You need to be grateful because it's actually you've got a right to it already. So we then pushed through, and then we went to go to the next slide. And we went to China, went to Wuhan. Obviously, he didn't go to Wuhan the first time because he phoned me up the day before and he said he'd been banned from China because he'd been arrested for speaking up for human rights. Now you need to go on your own and lead the delegation. Yes, I said, all right, okay. But anyway, so it went there, pushed the points in Wuhan on that. And then in Wuhan, there was a second part when we got to Hong Kong. And in the taxi go to Hong Kong, met somebody from Chengdu in the taxi. And they said, where are you from? I go, England. They go, whereabouts? You went Fairfield. I go, Letchworth. I go, the Garden City. I go, yes, we want to be one. Yeah. And of course, Yves had already geared up with Ming on participatory budgeting. So we then arranged, we went over to Garden City, to Chengdu. And I took John Lewis, who's actually mentioned there, who was the guy who'd become the new chief executive team that had already taken me to the High Court, because he made us make friends, yeah, which was really nice, you know, so we got to sort it all out. So we all went there and we went off to Chengdu. And then I realized that we managed to layer in this whole idea of participatory budgeting, the garden cities, everything, what they wanted to see, to give things respectability as you're actually going to push it through. And I do remember Ming sitting in the tea houses in Chengdu. As I told, this is where you discuss philosophy and ideas, as we sat and talked about participatory budgeting. So go to the next slide. Even I then wrote up, he was very keen on the whole idea of the garden city, that food was right at the core of it. So we did a load of research about the first book, The Letchworth Legacy. The whole idea, though, of community land trusts and garden cities. Yves, of course, has got the networks, as everyone's talking about, in America with the community land trust movement there, which we'd hooked up with that. And then they wrote this book called On Common Ground, which is the story of land trusts in America. And they invited Yves and I to write the first chapter. If you go to the next slide. So I said to Yves, after, because we got interrupted by COVID and Yves' cancer and things, and I said, well, we didn't get to go to America to launch that book. I said, why don't we just go? Yeah, why don't we just go and do our own trip? So we did. The year before he died, in September, we went and did a trip across the East Coast and worked our way down. And what I didn't realize was, if we go to the next slide, and this is in Boston, talking about food, and this lady there, we met them, and they're using food and the new farm to actually uplift poverty, clear crime out of communities. Yves was really impressed with this one there. And then we went on to the next slide. Went to Southside community, and I thought we were just turning up at these places. No, these places already knew Yves, because he'd been around, he'd taken these people to the UN to speak about community land trusts from years before. So it's already a hero when we turn up, we're looked after, taken around. And the story that again, they've been going for 40 years. And then we went to the next slide. We went to Burlington. This is Dudley. This is another one in Boston. I'll go on to the next slide, which is a very good story. Went to Burlington, Vermont, community land trust founded by Bernie Saunders in the early 1980s, grown hugely. The reason it grew is he helped it to win the Habitat Award, Habitat Award winner. And winning that in America for community land trust in America gave it international respectability as a model, because you can make that model elsewhere, but you got it in America, and we got this respectability. This one in America, from 40 million to 300 million pounds, $1 million now. It's huge landlord and actually growing really, really strong. So we go to the next slide. Then we look at the farming there, which is a key part of the community land trust. The food, land trust, it's a whole thing together. If you go to the next one. He had to fly back, unfortunately, because his sister was seriously ill. But we did go to Athens in Georgia, which was all about blending together all these things. This is all about forced evictions and gentrification that was going on in an American town, actually. In university towns, they're driving out the poorer population to actually make space for students. I went to New Communities Inc., which grew out the civil rights movement, which was a shame that Yves couldn't be there. And if you go to the next slide. Then I went to Puerto Rico, where again, actually, they've been expecting to welcome Yves because he'd got them Habitat Award. It helped them to get the Habitat Award in Puerto Rico with the Community Land Trust there. Again, it was all about eviction. How did they stop evictions taking place? They turned the land into a community land trust. Yeah, and I thought all my fights in Letchworth are like sort of Church of England or sort of storm in a teacup, but this is real stuff going on. Yeah, and they'd actually overturned it and drawn so much inspiration from what had gone on. Unfortunately, Yves had gone back, but I kind of picked up, actually, as we've gone around, actually, the strength And the Puerto Rico example, sitting on that bridge between the North and South Americas, was inspired South America, that story of cascading of respectability to work its way down. So if we go to the next slide. So I put down here, it's not come out that well, but I talked about Yves championing all of the garden cities and about food and participatory budgeting and also evictions. And he blended these things together as one big thing. That was the real power that he got, because we're talking about these individual things, but he blended them together in this one big push that we could actually go out and champion. So, and then if we go to the that picture of Yves before the previous slide, where he was addressing people in Britain at Dale Farm, yeah, and I told him actually, because he got cascaded in the Daily Mail, which you mentioned earlier. I said, that's a badge of honour. I said, to be that's a badge of honour to be taken out by the Daily Mail. So don't worry. So we went around Puerto Rico. I went around North America. And in fact, all the places we went around together as co-conspirators, we learned of the struggle, we learned the fight for the right to exist, we learned about the struggle against capital, which we'll be fighting against people and blocking them. We see the accusations made against activists, they're in the pocket of somebody else. But we saw the enduring belief in the cause, and at the heart of that cause, with Yves, inspiring and guiding where he could. Thank you very much.
Very much, Judith, for this, for showing us the garden cities and how important it was to this whole movement of interest in general. That's very cool. Robert, please. Have you got the speaker? Yes,
Please, let's try and keep it to 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Nobody respects me as the chair.
Okay, thanks very much. So I met Yves when he first came to the DPU, and he was working on urban agriculture, and we had a certain amount of complementarity because I was a practicing agroecologist. And we both came from a kind of very left-wing background, but we both aspired to turn this from an abstract idea into something concrete. And I think where we sort of came together is the agroecology aspect, which I was arguing for, was it emphasizes the fact that we need to reconnect with nature, and that the social and institutional solution cannot be separated from our relationship with nature and overcoming that alienation. So I think that was the core idea which got us working together. And we constituted a creative partnership. There's been a lot in the media about the Beatles recently because they're promoting some movies. And we were very much like that. We could argue and fight and sometimes not be talking to each other for a while. But this was sustained by a very deep comradeship and love and dedication to a common cause. And that cause was kind of finding workable solutions which would really embed socialistic principles and the principles of reintegrating with nature, embed those within real lasting institutional kind of structures, okay? And these structures could be an answer to the problem in the present, but also looking towards the future. So this is a kind of projection into the future on the basis of understanding where we come from. So it's a two-way reconnection with the past and with the future. And I think a lot of what Yves was doing, he was doing things which are very concrete now, but which also prefigure what is going to happen, what the outlines of a new society are going to be. We use this term prefigurative a lot now, which we didn't, it wasn't used so much, but this is essentially what we were talking about. Yves had a fantastic way of orienting himself within a particular situation. And he did this when he was working with resource centers on urban agriculture and food security. He went into a particular city, he could kind of be parachuted in and understand the balance of forces and the relationships there instantaneously. And I saw him doing this in Letchworth, and of course he very quickly identified Philip as a lifelong comrade. And this is exactly the way he worked. So he could assemble the progressive forces. He could also isolate the enemy. This is quite an important part of this. And Yves and I had quite a lot of kind of off-the-record conversations. So one of his kind of bedside reading was the Chinese military classic, The Art of War by Sun Tzu, in a French translation. And he explained in fascinating detail how he worked with this. So there's one technique which Sun Tzu calls beating the grassland to dislodge the snake. And so this is actually quite interesting because he was working to identify the progressive forces and to bring them together against the enemy. And so this is kind of creating a basis for a meaningful action, which really makes sense right now, but it's also looking to the future. So I think this is quite interesting. Yves was a very, very skilled political operator, and he could work on the ground and he could really get things done. On the other hand, if you knew him well, he had a spiritual and mystical dimension, which wasn't so obvious, but I think the two nourished each other. And there was, I picked up a hint from one of the things we were working together in teaching urban agriculture, and this was when he was talking about in this area, which is called North America. We more usually call it Turtle Island now. That's the term I prefer. And he was saying that a lot of the activists in urban agriculture in this area are indigenous population. So I thought this is very interesting because this is a kind of reconnection of where we have come from. And in a way, the way that I've developed our module since Yves left, but I think in really in the spirit of Yves, this is what I'm aiming for, has been to build that kind of reconnection with indigenous approaches to farming. And this is the human habitation, which is linked with its surrounding terrain and its surrounding food system, which is the basis of the Garden City model and all of that.
Very much, Robert, also for reminding us the spiritual connection and the spiritual element in Yves' thinking. We will now have Francisco online. Francisco.
Hello, everyone. Should I share my screen? Perfect. Hello, everyone. Good morning here in Chile, and good afternoon to all. I'm very pleased to having me here. And I met Yves in 2020 as a student, and later I have the privilege to have him as an examiner for my PhD upgrade. So it's been a pleasure to share thoughts with Yves. Particularly in this presentation, around food sovereignty in practice at a neighborhood scale, focused on the case of ollas comunes, which is community kitchens, community soup kitchens, or communal pots, whatever you want to say in English, but I do prefer to refer to community kitchens as ollas comunes, which makes sense to me. And as seen in this picture, it's not only about food, it's about a struggle. As you can see in this picture, olla común or community kitchens are used as a cultural element, as a spoon in the hand, or a fire and a large pot. This photo is during the social revolt in 2019 in Santiago's streets. Next, please. Sorry. So Alban mentioned it before around this event, this DPU food-related research event in November 2023, where we had the privilege to have Yves' thoughts and insight and hypothesis around some cutting-edge issues. And I took one of the words that Yves mentioned in that occasion. We need to look below the radar in the direction of struggles. community-based initiatives and local governments and CBOs programs as they reveal what is important to them. Generally, they are silenced by politics and the media. Let's have a look at some of them. And then he shared 8 insights, hypotheses. I'm gonna focus on only 3 of those hypotheses. The first one, as you can see, is regarding the struggle for food, and healthy food is becoming a catalyst for social movement and people's-based initiatives, including policy formulation. So I will focus on the case of Lima, which Yves was very interested with colleagues there, Alain Santandreu and also Quito, the city of Quito, because he was working there. But also I'm interpreting those thoughts around my empirical findings in my PhD thesis in Santiago, Chile. So overall, these ollas comunes emerged as form of self-managed, autonomous community organizations to feed the resident of the poorest area of the city. They cook together, but also they do the logistics to source and procure food, to storage food, to refrigerate that food, and then cook together and this distributed meal to the most in need in their neighborhood, street people, disabled people, older people, and so on, etc. So, overall, they have received almost no public aid and have to supply themselves with a few resources they manage based on solidarity networks, a really important part, the solidarity networks, or in some cases, as the case in Lima, based on selling their rations for less than $1 to find themselves. They showed that the most effective food aid in time of crisis during the pandemic particularly came from community organizations rather than from the authorities. As you can see in both pictures, the main element is the large pot, which are cooked on open air spaces, but also in, for example, in neighborhood centers or community centers, and they are provided in these plastic containers to the people or to the eaters outside this space. So regarding the spatiality component of ollas comunes, as you can see in this map, I gather public data through a transparency law in Chile. So I could say that in 2020 in Santiago, as you can see in the map, there were almost 1,200 ollas comunes functioning, cooking 3 days in average per week, equivalent to 500,000 meals per week, which is a lot. As you can see in the map, there is a huge correlation between low-income neighborhoods or low-income backgrounds where they emerge in these purple dots compared to the highest income district in Santiago City. Is in a similar way, you know, just comunes in the metropolitan Lima, where they were almost 2,000 in 2020, but they continue, as you can see, functioning in 2024 until now, compared to the Santiago example, that there is much less than in the pandemic, but they're still working. Linking to healthy food and struggling in the city with the land in the city, the contested land in the city, new community gardens were developed in Lima as well as in Santiago, led by these community kitchens in their neighborhoods, for example, in cultural centers, in neighborhood community centers, and so on. And so it's very important, this component, with partnership with other NGOs that they did capacitation and trainings for them to cultivate their own food for the pot. And finally, for this first hypothesis, it's a very political one because particularly in Lima, they have a community kitchen network which they secure the approval of several initiatives and laws and proposals, for example, recognizing ollas comunes to ensure specific funding for them to operate regularly. As well as in 2022, this network presented a food policy agenda, as you can see in the image, comprising 15 priority actions, which are very comprehensive around agriculture, but also rescuing food from farmers and markets and so on. In Santiago, in turn, There was no network like the one in Lima, although there were some informal networks within the same district and collaborations between ollas in the redistribution of food donated. The second hypothesis is regarding community-led food-related practices, reveal the importance of healthy food neighborhood. This is central for Yves. He was very concerned about the neighborhood scale, and usually the food sovereignty angle is more rural, focusing in the campesino and la via campesina. Then it is very important to refocus the angle of neighborhood food to reach this urban food sovereignty. So discussion about food system often overlook the neighborhood, where local actors and dynamics are displayed based on proximity, such as in this example of community kitchens in Cerro Navia, which is a very poor district in Santiago. As you can see, within the red lines, there is a blue umbrellas positioning in the street. There are open free street farmers market providing food to the residents, in this occasion for two community kitchens, number 7 and number 9. They approximately 1 minute distant walking and the other one 3 minutes walking. And this farmers market operate 2 days per week. So community gardens, local markets, street farmers market, and community kitchens take on greater significance when viewed in terms of proximity and food availability. And the final hypothesis that I'm going to address is what is under construction are consumers, producers-based food nexus between community kitchens and the local organic producers. This is evident in the case of Lima. In Lima, ollas comunes began to recover from local farms connected with the universities as well. Yet the challenge is still to expand to the more than 2,000 ollas comunes that are all functioning today and connect with other producers. However, in Santiago, we can see that these practices of community kitchens are often linked to recovering food from street farmers market and food banks, private food banks, as well as municipal food banks. Yet the challenge is to connect directly with farms or producers. Thank you very much. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Francisco, for your presentation, and for showing us how important it was for Yves to refocus food sovereignty in the urban and what it actually means to have food security, sovereignty in the urban. Now, please, Cecília Marroquino, can you unmute yourself? Perfect. We will spotlight you.
Hello, could you hear me? Hello, could you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Will you now hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to speak today. It is both an honor and a deeply emotional moment for me. I would have very much liked to be with you in person, but unfortunately I cannot, and I'm grateful to be able to join you even from distance to honor Yves. Yves was not only a colleague, but a guiding light and also a friend. And it is a rare privilege when you have the opportunity to work with a friend. I first met Yves when I was a student developing my thesis. At that time, he was a director of the urban management program in Ecuador. And we worked together on a project on productive household in Cuenca, which marked the beginning of many collaboration. And then over time, our conversations naturally evolved towards the food agenda, questioning why food system remained such a stranger in urban planning. And so we decided to embark on a journey together. So co-editing the UCL, the FAO UCL book, Integrating Food into Urban Planning, with contribution from many colleagues and friends, some of whom I'm very glad to see here today. And when I think about his contribution on all this work, for me, at the heart of his legacy was his way of working. Much of what has been shared today resonates strongly with me. So I believe in listening first, in taking time, in learning from people lived experience, and in grounding ideas in reality. always a genuine care for people, for places, for issues he worked on. And I remember when I first joined FAO, he told me something I've never forgotten. Do not just use nice keywords. Do not just be the typical UN. Be real. Ground your work on reality. Brings people voice in your work. Bring the voices of cities in the room. This was not just advice. It was his method, his ethic. And I remember a mission we shared in Ecuador. We spent long day listening, communities, Peruvian migrants living in tenement houses, the conventillos. And he was not just collecting information. He was trying to understand it deeply, with curiosity, what Cecilia was mentioning before, taking time with people, ensuring that their voice were heard and recognized, and they could actually influence decisions. So, and in terms of food agenda and urban agriculture, a major contribution of Yves was how he reframed urban agriculture within a broader vision of what he was proud to call the multi-scalar food system planning. For him, urban agriculture was about citizenship, right, democracy, social cohesion, and he was always very clear with mayors, in FAO, with colleagues, practitioners. Urban agriculture alone cannot solve any problem, including food insecurity. Instead, he saw it as a powerful entry point, a trigger to a wider transformation. And in this sense, he was a truly system thinker. I remember one of our main brainstorming sessions while working on the book. We were discussing how food planning process can begin from very different entry point. Sometimes health, sometimes waste, sometimes market. But his message was always clear. There is no single right entry point. What matters is what comes next, the ability to progressively build a coherent and integrated approach. He insisted a lot in making connection, in creating alliance between people on the ground, linking urban and peri-urban agriculture to distribution, to waste management, to circularity, and to all the other systems, mobility, housing, health. And that was the beauty of working with Yves, connecting and creating alliance. He used to say, I remember, to a mayor to a governor in Nairobi, if the food system is complex, start where you can, but do not stay there. And for him, the real challenge was exactly to connect over time the different dimensions, health, climate, food security, equity, into a shared vision. And with this idea, introduced this brilliant idea of multi-scalar food system planning, bringing coherence across the food cycle, the actors, and the spaces and scale from neighborhood to region. So for Yves, the spatial dimension was essential, and all the food strategy should be translated in the spatial term. And then I want to bring another element, which is the democratic and multi-actor governance, which was a great contribution in terms of in the food planning agenda. For Yves, food planning was not simply technical. He believed that sustainable urban food strategy must be co-created by local government, civil society, producers, community, and critically, the informal food sector, which he was working a lot in many cities in Africa, Latin America, and even in Middle East with him. He placed a great importance on multi-actor platforms, such as this Food Policy Council, and he was placing, even in the book, at the heart of the food system governance. He was believing in this mechanism for ownership, for inclusion, and for legitimacy, but at the same time, Yves raised difficult and important questions that remain still relevant today for all the Food Policy Council, the governance, and the food system planning that we are doing. How do we make this mechanism last? And how we transform them in a permanent governance structure? And how do we sustain energy and engagement over time? For him, the challenges was not really creating participation, but really create ownership at a local level and having an inclusive democracy. And then another point that I want to make is the ability that Yves helped transform both global narrative and the city level practice. When we began, food was largely absent from urban planning debate. Approaches were fragmented and urban agriculture is isolated. And in a way, Yves helped change that. I recall our trip to New York in 2015, and Cecilia was with us during the Habitat Tree process. The zero draft of the new urban agenda did not even mention food, and is, as he would say, mentioning it is not enough. So he persisted, advocating for something more meaningful, a standalone paragraph on integrating food into urban planning. And it was not an easy process, but at the end we succeed. And when the new urban agenda was adopted in Quito in 2016, it included for the first time explicit reference to food security and nutrition in planning. And that was an important milestone, the work that contributing also to shaping the FAO urban agenda and building network that continue to guide our work today in FAO. At city level was equally influential. And I remember his work in Nairobi, where he helped shift the perspective from urban agriculture to a broader food system approach. And he encouraged for a more holistic vision that today is reflected in Nairobi Food Strategy and in the Food Policy Council at the governorate level. So none of this was easy, but Yves believed in it with conviction, generosity, and always with a sense of joy. So Yves' contribution is not only in the idea he developed, but he transformed the way we think and we act. So for me, his legacy is also a responsibility. And I would like to end with something he said in one of our last conversation. Now it's time to go further. We need a practical manual on how to integrate food into urban planning, taking into account multi-level governance. So for him, knowledge was never an end point. It was always a step toward action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cecilia, and thank you so much for this call for further action. I'm looking forward to contributing to that call with you and to other colleagues that were present today. Again, thank you to all the speakers for this session. It was very important to just review Yves' different contributions to the field of food systems in general. The connection with the urban, how city region food systems, and this holistic, this full understanding of a systemic approach of the food system was particularly important to him, but also the depth of his intellectual knowledge, not only Eurocentric, but how he arrived to this holistic vision through several different sources of literature, as Robert explained to us, and how that really contributed to his vision and to his understanding of solidarity. We looked at how, concrete it was for Yves to establish practical mechanisms of how to do food sovereignty in the urban, in specific neighborhoods, and we looked at examples of how this work still continues and resonates with the work Francisco is doing with Ollas Comunes. And we looked with Philip at the political activist side that he had, and how he was banned in China, apparently, and how he faced a couple of issues because of how vocal he was and how opinionated he was, and that's why we loved him. And with Cecilia, we continue this legacy of really trying to push for food planning, and as he wanted it, and guide to food planning. So thank you all for these contributions. Thank you all. If you have a couple of questions, we've got 2 more minutes, but otherwise after that we've got a small break and then the book launch.
Can I say a few things?
Yes.
In the scholarship, but also in the policy discussion, and this comes out of her long engagement with what we jointly named the Silk Cities, where she was when she was a student, a PhD student under Cassidy, and I was second supervisor. Discussions about all that heritage along that enormous region that extends across the Middle East onto China, which was being lost in some ways, partly through natural disasters, partly through war, partly through neglect, or transformation or modernization. And Farnaz has been a huge advocate of that, maintaining, documenting, discussing that heritage. And this is yet another step in that direction. So Farnaz, over to you. Congratulations on the launch of the book. We will toast after that.
Yes.
We will toast with the water. So there you are, Farnaz.
Thank you very much. Okay, this is, I don't know, how can I show it?
I need to change my background.
Yes. Closer.
Yeah, but I need to change my background.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. So I think I talk a little bit short because I think Judith, this is a collaborative work with which Judith, Yves, and I worked on. So definitely Judith have something to say. I just want to mention that everyone talked about how they knew Yves. And just building on what Julio said, I know Yves from 2010, when knocking on the doors as a mature PhD student, having a vision in mind, and Yves, Julio, Cassidy, Michael, and Karen, they supported and they put their trust in me. And from then, so we organized something that was labeled as a landmark event after the revolution in Iran, a purely scientific discussion without any other things. And 2 years later, with the help of Julio, Cassidy, and Yves, Silk Cities was established to help with the knowledge exchange, to help with the collaborative research, and to be a place of equal opportunities. Not everyone can go to UCL, not everyone can go to, good Western countries. And so to help the younger generation of practitioners and researchers in the developing countries and bring their voice to the global knowledge network. And the series of conferences that we are doing and the books that we are producing, peer-reviewed, completely independent, but out of a carefully selected contributions from our conferences. Yves was a mentor who, in difficult times, I could have gone, to Yves, how should I negotiate this difficult situation, with this potential local partner and other things. And he was, in all our projects, very effective and contributing. And the last conference in Tunisia, he very late actually confirmed that he would come. But I remember, the network that he had. In just 1 week, he organized a panel discussion, bringing social actors, activists, NGOs, civil society, and organized a very buzzing panel there. And the idea of this book, actually, it is sharing some of the learning opportunities or perhaps new directions with others. So this book is an advocacy. Is an advocacy of the need to first recognize and then consider intangible heritage, especially cultural practices in urban development planning, in urban transformations. And UN Habitat 2017, it says that, yes, culture is very important, the need for integration, but in reality, it is missing. So when
other colleagues were talking about the food, bringing food system into urban development, I was like, okay, in this book, actually integrating cultural practices to urban development planning. We had, with Judith, Yves, and I, we selected 10 of the many papers that they were, and we divided the work. We established our vision that we don't want to repeat the already told stories. We are looking for underexplored cases. We are looking for new and exploratory approaches, ideas, and that sort of thing. We started working and mentoring authors, which Fatima is one of them that fortunately attended in person, and 4 other authors, Shaghayeq, Asma, they attended online, I think. And almost at late stage of working on the book, suddenly it left us. So we had a dilemma. What shall we do? Shall we stop the work or shall we continue? And we talked with the publisher as well. And we felt that it's the time for us to be resilient, and continue and finish the job. So it took us a little bit longer than expected, that's obvious. And we, of course, informed Cecilia that we wanted to continue the work. And here it is. Mm-hmm. And the case studies are from Portugal, India, Iran, Italy, US, UK, Tunisia, Jordan, and Syria. I think I would like invite Judith to have something to say, because we work together, and then I continue. Judith,
you need to unmute yourself. Great.
Yes. Hello. I'm very sad that I can't be with you in person. That's the 1 week I'm not in London, so that is just fate. But anyway, I'm very glad that I was able to connect with you, and also that we can launch the book at this occasion. Just a few points. I was obviously looking forward enormously working with Farnaz and Yves on this, because it was more than just editing. We really had a big discussion about what the content of the book was about, what our approach would be, how we could select originality, but also complementary ways of seeing from a cultural point of view all this intangible heritage. So it was very, very exciting, and it was very sad that he left us so suddenly, unexpectedly. In fact, we had a meeting in London about the book, I think 10 days before he left us. So that was very, very sad. And of course, I have been connected with DPU on a sort of small way since the time when Otto Königsberger was running the predecessor at the Architectural Association. So that takes me long time back, and I was always very much supportive of what this unit was doing. And so I'm very honored to be able to be here and say that how much I appreciated to work with Yves. I also knew him from before, went to his lectures and things like that. And he was just a very exceptional, extraordinary, inspiring person. And we all miss him very, very much.
Thank you very much, Judith. I want to go back to the book. So we selected 10, the book has 10 main chapters. Also, we have the first chapter on theoretically linking intangible heritage with urban development and why this is a case, why we need to move away from making intangible heritage a commodity, you know, because the race for recognizing intangible heritage, which is advocated by even international agencies like UNESCO, it adds to the division, you know, and it doesn't go through the layers, the very day-to-day layers of urban development practices. So to us, it has been superficial. And the chapters have very interesting new ideas. For example, one chapter argues that we can use collective memory as a way to keep Persian gardens alive. A fascinating research over 40 years, documenting and exploring over 600 sites of Persian gardens and categorizing them, you know, some of them completely faded, some of them still there, some of them, and they argue that collective memory can be another way of mitigation, basically. And another one was that from US, actually, Jason, the intangible heritage mapping to be used for narrative, for saying narrative and a narrative structure in order to put immigrants on ease when they come to a city and everything. So they are different notions, or for example, Fateme. The Fatime's work is very interesting that she did a PhD in UK, developed a theoretical framework, and that theoretical framework inspired an architectural consultancy in the UK, in London, to use that, you know, to adopt that and do a community work for the park regeneration in East London. So these kind of things, and for example, I think Zina is online, that how the practice of food making in Syria helped the resilience of people, help people to come together and help them economically as well. From the other hand, we have other chapter on the fading cultural practices because of institutional barriers, religious, cultural barriers, another case study. And I don't want to tell the whole book because, you know, it's just a snapshot. So I hope UCL library will have it. I hope UCL library will have it and you will all read it. But I promise you, it's. I think they are expensive usually.
Books are not the cheapest in the market.
Exactly.
This was probably £110.
So I think it's better the library to buy it, to be honest.
And then you can download it electronically.
Exactly. And it does have lots of new directions, lots of new perspectives that we believe it's aligned with the legacy, you know, that we have from Yves. And it can inspire new directions, new research, and new practical approaches. And I don't want to be very long, but I'm sure that, so to end it, I'm sure that if Yves was here now, he would have been very happy and celebrating with us for this book. So thank you very much for including the book launch in this important program. Thank you, Julio. Thank you, Cecilia.
Thank you, Farnaz. That was brilliant. I think that concludes proceedings for the day. You know, we've had a wonderful day. Cecilia, you've got a few few words to say. I just towards the end, I want to thank a number of people, but I think more than enough has been said about Yves. I mean, there are lots of epithets, adjectives about Yves, and they're all very well deserved and merited. So I leave the nearly last word to you, Cecilia, and I'll just thank everybody.
Thank you all for the powerful reflections and sharing complex experience. It was deeply emotional and a privilege to listen to all speakers. Looking forward, thank you for everybody that has put proposals on the table. It is unfair to name just a few. So everybody, I think we need to keep the conversation going. I shall say that there is a small committee helping me with Yves' intellectual legacy. This committee, and I want to thank you, them. Some of them are here, like Philip and Barbara. Some of them maybe are online, like Michelle, Alessio, Patrick. All this committee is, I should give a big thank you for everything, for the emotional aid that you are giving me, and for the also to help me to find a way of keeping the intellectual legacy of Yves alive. I also want to share that there's a lot of material, I mean, papers and books that Yves has done all through his long professional life. Those books are stored in Portugal, in Lisbon, with a foundation that is helping me on this. And the idea is that all the material should be open to everyone that wants to study Yves' life. So I would very much enjoy and invite you to go to Lisbon and to use that material and to keep expanding all the inspiring learnings that we can take from its legacy. So let's keep this conversation alive. Let's keep doing things. Yves is with us and should be with us forever. So feel free to keep in touch. Feel free to visit all the inspirational material that we have in Lisbon, and let's continue this conversation ongoing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cecilia, for these moving words. And it just leaves to me the last thing to do is thank everybody who's been amazing. It's been a really very appropriate celebration of an amazing person, human being, intellectual activist, friend, I'm sure husband as well. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to all the, I mean, he was full of love, this guy. He was such an intense person. He was amazing. I mean, And the students, and sadly, we don't have more presentation of the students. He had several cohorts, 10 years of DPU students who came, and I'm sure some of them have been online, and but he really loved his students in an amazing way. He had a huge heart and capacity to love that was beyond belief. So thank you, Cecilia, for making all the effort to coming here.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's
A final word. You
Yes.
are Yves' family. Thank you
Yes,
so
we
much.
are. Thank you also to Alex, who's left the room, to Alban Asson, who's done an amazing job, not only as a chair and convener of that panel, but also all the connection with the interpreters. And you've done much more than, actually, when we invited you, it wasn't with a devious sense of saying, this guy's the best. You were actually really thinking, oh my goodness. It's one of his busiest weeks ever in the year, probably. So, you know, you need to be celebrated. And now he's off to watch, of course, France and Senegal. What else?
I'm sure.
Alex McFarlane, and thank Chris Seal, who's here. Chris, you've been amazing as always in helping us with the drinks and you know, some of the other nibbles on the logistics and books in the room. The interpreters were amazing. I already thanked them. Julian for as DPU director for funding part of this. It's a shame that he couldn't make it, but he's here in spirit. And of course, Cassidy and Barbara, you've been lovely to work with. I mean, it really is. We should do these things more often because, you know, it gets us together. And, you know, all the juices flowing and all the adrenaline running. It's really an amazing thing. So thank you all for coming here and help yourselves to drink. We have to leave shortly before 7 or so, but, you know, just feel free to mingle. Thank you a lot.
Thank you.